4 minutes late. I'll be honest. I was worried that I would be later than that, so I can live with that on a fine hump day, riding out the middle of the week. My dear friends, thinkers, gamers, welcome back to Tales of Praxis. I'm your host, Aaron Suduko, the founder of With a Terrible Fate. WithATerribleFate.com, if you haven't heard of us, is your first and final source for the literary studies and celebrations of video games as works of storytelling. You can find anything narrative related to do with your favorite medium of video games there, from long-form written articles to podcasts to lectures to indeed these live streams, which we treat as something like a live book club, working through games and studying them together as we go. Hey, Padre, hello. I know, that's right. It's serious time. Buckle up. Well, no, it's an artifact of two things, the jacket. First off, of course, there was going to come a time when all of the fun new Japan shirts ran out, so you've seen all of my fun new additions to my wardrobe. So we're back to the With a Terrible Fate shirt, of course. If you see this lurking around the internet, it's the literary studies of video games, courtesy of With a Terrible Fate. But also had to roll out the jacket because, as has, I guess, become kind of standard following my publications of articles in Tales of Praxis, wanted to be able to sport some good pin bling. Does it even count as sending something new into the world if you don't have pins to demonstrate your affinity to the fandom it's related to? I say no. If people are watching who are less familiar with Tales of Praxis and are a little lost as to what we're talking about, it's a series I've been running for about a year at this point, and With a Terrible Fate, focused just on Bandai Namco's exceptional series of JRPGs, the Tales or Tales of games, a series that meant a lot to me growing up, and to a lot of other gamers as well. And so as a philosopher of video game narrative, I decided it was past time to take an analytical lens on the overall series, play them all, work through them all, and see what themes they're concerned with, what they want to encourage their players to wrestle with, both in the games and in their real lives, and the language that they put together for how to tell stories about those themes and how to help people work through them in a variety of ways. So that was my big inspiration of a project to take on, the size of which I don't think I fully processed at the time, back when Tales of Symphonia Remastered was released, because that was my entry point in many ways into video games, storytelling, philosophy, certainly the series. So we've been rolling forward from there in two main formats. One has been this live book club that we've been doing on Twitch, which has been such a joy. The hope is that ultimately with the Terrible Fates channel, we'll have a range of other narrative-related content studying video games, but for the time being, it's primarily concerned with Tales of Praxis, just working through various entries in the Tales series with a wide range of people who join our real-life JRPG party in the chat, some of whom have encyclopedic knowledge of the series, like our dear friends Grail and Podry, some of whom just love video game storytelling and want to get to know a new series. So whichever side of that fence you sit on, encourage you to join us, especially if you're watching the VOD or lurking. It's a great time because in the next little while, it looks like we'll finally be wrapping up our almost 100-hour journey, if you can believe it. I certainly can, through Tales of Grace's F. And then we'll be turning our attention to a new duology, and also quite truly new for me because it's a duology in the Tales series that I've never played before, the Xillia games 1 and 2. And so it's a great time to jump in if you want to start from Jump Street on a live adventure with us. That'd be a lot of fun. The other half of the series, and it looks like I'll have to catch up in the chat, but it looks like we're already talking about it, which is great, is more of my bread and butter, which is long-form written analytical articles studying various aspects of the storytelling of these wonderful works that mean so much to so many of us. And so I actually published the latest entry in that side of the series just yesterday. So if you're interested in a work that shows what Tales of Praxis is about, that goes back to the beginning of the Tales series, that, as with all video game analysis, is deeply personal, but also tries to provide any gamer who's interested in these games and who loves them, a new way of playing them and thinking about the ways in which their parts are related to one another. Encourage you to check that out. Hoping we can chat about it a bit on the stream. And I have some thoughts that I'll share too. So it's going to be a good hump day. Plenty of reason for being late because I had to put my thoughts together on the article and diving into the end of Graces. So we have a lot of good stuff on our plate. I'll also just say I downed a spicier than expected bowl of pho right before this. So if I'm a little nasally, it's because the jalapenos in that just totally plowed through my system. So apologies in advance. All right, what are we talking about, guys? Oh, Pottery, I'm so happy that you said that about Dawn of the New World because we'll get to this. Like I said, I have a few things that I'd love to say just as sort of director's commentary or whatever you want to call it for my article, kinds of things that I was working through and that I hope people pay attention to. But I really feel like in large part of the article for me and why it took longer, but why I felt it warranted taking longer was I still to this day am trying to make sense of Dawn of the New World. And especially after playing it as part of the Tales of Praxis stream last year, it really left me feeling like there's got to be more there than people recognize and that Aaron recognized the first time he played it. So I'm still perpetually trying to unpack that, but I felt personally pretty satisfied with finding a new way into it with the article. So I'm so delighted that you felt that way too, my friend. Okay, and thank you, Grail. We're already seeding the Tales of Graces F plan. I will also say this is putting things a little out of order, but I went back to Graces, which I never do with the games that I'm streaming, but I put in some time to it today just because I really wanted to try to crawl through the final dungeon a little bit more. So I was hoping I'd be able to clean up all the chests and everything. I didn't. I only got through the first part of the shaft, but we got some new weapons, and the party is a little bit leveled up. So hopefully that'll open up some more options for us as well. And I'm definitely going to go back to that final dungeon because it's so fun, especially to be able to navigate it with the guide and use that like I was talking about. So we'll see the party getting a little beefier, I think, as we go into the post game here. Grail, you and Pottery both amaze me for reliably diving right into these articles no matter how long they are. So I know I say this every time, but I hope you both know how much I really appreciate you and being able to count on you as fully vetted and authentic Praxis gamers who are engaged with all aspects of the series. Well, it makes it all worth it, and it makes these discussions so much fun. So thank you for that. I know. Well, that's a good segue, Grail, what you said about how sad Chester is in comparison to the normal male best friend character, because I'll tell you, one of the things that made me really want to write this article was kind of similar, I guess, to the motivation that I had behind my character study of Regal, where I feel like going back to these games, I don't know if it's more a function of my getting older or the work that I've done studying and publishing on video games, maybe a little bit of both, but I really find myself looking at the characters who don't get as much attention in the main story and asking, well, why is that? What might they be trying to say? And what is the content of that character that we're not getting access to as players? These will all be familiar themes for those of you who have been following along on Tales of Praxis, because I talk about it a lot on the streams. And man, I'll tell you, going back to a 1995 game, in so many ways, a prototype for the series where everything feels maybe, relatively speaking, underdeveloped and it's not as long and you don't get skits in the version that we had on the Game Boy Advance that was localized here. But for all of that kind of reduction in quality and length, there was something almost more resonant and touching to me about these quiet, small scenes that we got with Chester. And like I talk about in the article, he's the kind of character that I never focused on and never put in my party during my original time with the game. And I think there's a lot of reasons that the game gives you to do that, to ignore him and to not think about him. And so it got my brain going, thinking, well, why is that? What are they trying to say? What is this all about? And so that was a big part of what was inspiring me to think about it. No, exactly. Especially when you're putting off your own writing, Grail. I think that's the perfect recipe for reading. I'm definitely the same way. The fact that he doesn't have the ability to relate to his friends because they're time travel and can't lean on them to process his trauma means that, ironically, he seems a bit stuck in the past. Yeah, I think that's a really trenchant observation, Pottery. Stuck in the past, I think I use the language bound to the past or his past trauma in the article because you're right. There's a sense in which he recognizes the need to work through that in the same way that Crest does, by the way, but he doesn't have the tools to do it as efficiently or as four-dimensionally with that kind of flexibility that the rest of the party has. And so he just has to stalwartly figure out a way to process it in his real life and in a way that is a little probably longer term and harder than the rest of the party. I don't think we have any reason to believe he's done processing the death of Ami by the end of the game's narrative, for instance. Yeah. Interesting. I didn't talk about this in the article, but you could almost do another look at the time travelers versus Douse in terms of how similar they are by the end of the game, because I talk about this way in which Douse almost seems completely disinterested in time. He deploys all of these minions into the history of Xillia, but he's not really interested in any actual events of the world. He just wants to suck all of its energy out and stop anything that's going to interfere with that. And I wonder whether there's something that can be said similarly about the time travelers, because you use the word present. I almost feel like by the end of the narrative, they have similarly maybe transcended our typical understanding of time, maybe in a way that makes them less present than someone like Chester, because I finished that study feeling really respectful of Chester and admiring him for the sense in which, even as he's bound to the past and trying to process it, the way in which he's doing that feels very grounded to me and very present tense. And so I know what you mean about the time travelers, but I just, especially after looking at Chester so much, I can't help but wonder whether there's a way in which, you know, their conception of time is less present and at the end of the day a little less healthy than Chester's. But that's something that we can talk about and tease out as we continue to work on here. Well, Grail, you can't blame me. You can blame Bamco for that. I mean, you know by now, anything that they localize, and if I can find a way to play the things that they don't localize, I'm going to play. So write to Bamco. Start writing letters and sending it to them saying, we need to do everything in Tales of Praxis, so that's the one reason you need to localize these other things. Yeah, that's an interesting way of putting it, Grail. It's like they're working through things that are historically relevant, like their own lives in the world, and so they arrive at that kind of transcendence of time in a much different way than Douse does. And maybe that's part of the magic of the ending, right? Maybe part of it is that they're able to empathize with Douse because they've kind of traveled time to the point that they're able to relate to and understand his perspective, but because they have come out of the world and into that perspective rather than Douse living in that perspective and just imposing his minions upon the world, they're able to use it more beneficently than Douse was able to conceive of. I could see that as one explanation there. Yeah, I think that's a great way of putting it, Pottery. I think, what did I end up naming that section? I had it pulled up here so that we could talk about it. The article, not that section specifically, but I love that you gravitated towards that one. I called it Humanity as an Intermediary. Yeah. Which I think, one thing that gets my goat, and this didn't get into the article, but if you look at the Wikipedia page for Ratatosk the squirrel in Norse mythology, they make this point of saying how it's referenced in Dawn of the New World, but the way in which it's used in Dawn of the New World really doesn't have anything to do with Ratatosk, the entity from Norse mythology. So they say, and I think, the more I've thought about the nature of Emil and Ratatosk, as I've worked out in these last couple of studies, the more I think that's just deeply untrue. I think there's something tremendously important in what Emil does, Emil especially, because like I talk about in the article, there's nothing really that inheres to him. Like, regardless of what he goes through on his journey, there's a deep and true sense in which he's this kind of fiction that was created by Ratatosk and is not a person, right? But what's amazing is that he's able to develop this sense of self by surfacing the lives and contexts and interests of everyone else in this diverse world, many of whom have prejudices and many reasons not to talk to each other. And he brings that all out in the open as a way of starting these conversations that I think in large part makes possible the different kind of Xillian world that we then see having come to fruition in Tales of Phantasia. And I think while that is, like I talk about in the article, something that can easily be read as this esoteric journey of rectifying the world, not dissimilar to Tales of the Abyss, I think there's also just something deeply human about that. It's almost a community-oriented perspective on something similar to what I talked about in my study of Tales of Vesperia, this idea that we can come to get a sense of who we are by investing in and surfacing and facilitating conversations between the lives of those beyond ourselves, right? Yes, and exactly right, Pottery. I'm so glad you picked up on that. Not surprised, but glad. Yes, a big part of what I wanted to draw out in that section is that exactly as he's doing this for all of the Tethealans and Silveranti and half-elves and pick your poison within the world, he's also doing the exact same thing for the player, which is, you'll remember I framed that section as a kind of puzzle and a solution, and the solution to how I think the player is supposed to be able to get enough understanding of Emil to know not to go through with that final battle between him and Lloyd and Marta is exactly by taking Emil on these journeys to surface all of the information that we get in the side quests and the lives of other people that don't even have to do with the main plot. And that information is conveyed to the player and surfaced to them to give them a different understanding of the world, of Emil, of everything in between. Yeah. Yes, that's like, I loved it because it's one of those things like I have begun talking more about my writing process because I guess some people find it interesting, but I like part of what was fun about doing this with Chester was that by the time I had worked out the symbolism of Chester, I had this nagging feeling that it was deeply relevant to the other games because I'd had this idea. It's funny, like I had these two separate Word documents, right? One, an idea for a character study of Chester, and the other, this idea that throughout all three of these Xillia games that we have in the West, there's this deep concern with figuring out how to act when you don't have enough context to understand the impact your actions are going to have on the world. And then it was only as I was sitting with and thinking about Chester that I found myself feeling, oh, okay, maybe the way this guy deals with it is a way into understanding this other idea in the series more broadly, which is what I worked out in the article. But yeah, so when I went into that Dawn of the New World section, I had that puzzle, the idea that was really frustrating me because I remember as a kid when I first played it, I had no idea what I was supposed to do in that final battle, and it felt deeply unfair, like I had failed at the game without having enough information to know what it took to win by not fighting Marta and Lloyd. So I wanted to try to figure out, like, is there an explanation? Is there a way that we can do justice to the game to explain what's going on in that moment and how the player is actually supposed to be able to make that choice? And are there any pointed thematic connections there that can be tied into the rest of the games? And yeah, Chester ended up being the solution to that for me. So it's one of those studies where I almost now want to go back and play Dawn of the New World again with fresh eyes. So it might be back on my list. Yeah, the distinction, Pottery, I would say, because I thought about this a bit. I didn't put it into the article because it would have been too long. But between something like Yuri and something like Emil is I come out at the end of Tales of Vesperia thinking that part of what I talk about in the symbolism of Dane Nomos is this idea that people can become empowered by supporting the individual narratives of people beyond them. So the way in which the party will go about focusing on the individual stories and desires and lives of Rapide, Raven, Jaeger, name whomever you're interested in, right? Whereas with Emil, I think it's more of a networking function where he's more in the first instance concerned with or maybe not concerned with, but the consequence of his engagement with people is connecting them to have conversations in groups. So deeply interrelated ideas, no doubt. But I think Emil and that idea of courage, right, like I talk about at the very end of the article, is something that I see as more concerned with what it takes to act and facilitate those connections in the first place. Whereas then once you have that courage to action, we can think through the sort of principles of will that I talk about in the Dimlos and De Nomos piece, if that makes sense. Oh, Grail, I was gonna check your messages because I didn't want you to be left behind, but it sounds like, as you said, you're saying the exact same thing. Perfect. Well, I love that we're all on the same page. And it's funny that that page is Dawn of the New World, but I kind of love that. Taking the player-avatar relationship further, Ratatosk the squirrel takes messages back and forth from the gods to the serpent. Nidhogg, yes, I think is how you say that, but like I said in the article, I'm not a Norse scholar by any means. Ratatosk the summon spirit takes messages, inputs back and forth from Emil and the player. Yep. I absolutely love that. I think you could easily take that and do a whole further study on Dawn of the New World in terms of the kinds of moments that you're able to affect as a player when Emil is in control versus when Ratatosk is in control in battle and other situations, because it does kind of bifurcate the kind of agency and connectivity that you have with the game. So I think that would be really, really interesting to look into. And we're already at the fun part of Tales of Praxis, right? We offer these interpretations and they spawn a million further things to think about if everything goes right. I love this. I think we're going to have plenty of occasion to keep talking about it. I'll quickly share my broader thoughts, just especially for the benefit of people who might be watching the VOD who haven't read the article yet, as a way of contextualizing it. But I imagine a lot of what I wrote as pre-roll, if you will, is stuff that's already come out here. I tweeted this, but I think it's worth repeating on the stream because I didn't realize this until after I had finished the article, but it kind of does synthesize the different goals that I have with Tales of Praxis. And I think it's something that can be valuable just for thinking about our relationship with series of storytelling that we love more broadly, games or otherwise. But I'm really concerned in this series, like I talk about quite a lot, with making sense of my personal relationships with these games and the actual history of the textual relationships between these games and how that came to be. And then also revisiting the ones that I didn't appreciate or feel like I didn't understand the first time through, like Dawn of the New World. And those all really bundled together quite nicely here, thinking about the point of origin of the series with Tales of Phantasia and my first exposure to the series with Tales of Symphonia, and then revisiting Dawn of the New World in the way that we've been talking about. But I think there is something, like, to me, conceptually powerful about that the more I was thinking about it, where these texts that we consider, these works of art, are in many ways media for making sense of our own experiences with them and developing new tools, if all goes well, for us to think about and interpret our experiences in the world or in any format, right? And so to be able to consider the medium in a way that does justice to the text, but also has in mind our personal experience with it in a way that we can then leverage that experience and the text to critically reconsider other experiences, like maybe the time we've spent with games or texts that we didn't get the first time, but see it in a different light. I think there's something interpretively powerful about that that speaks to how we can make sense of ourselves and then extend our agency to those texts we're spending time with and the way in which we're interpreting them to get something powerful out of it. So especially if you are a Tales fan, I hope that you check it out with that in mind and think about how you can apply that sort of praxis to your life and to other series that you may be interested in. I talked about that already. I'll mention this. It's a corollary of something I've already said, but we talk about a lot on the stream the way in which games can be stylized, right? Where so many games these days tend to try to focus on really high fidelity graphics and giant worlds so that you could almost imagine that they're just extensions of the real world where you can see the pores on everyone's faces and the dialogue is really clear and everything like that, right? And I've seen on the subreddit every now and then people talking about, oh, when are we going to get a remake of Tales of Phantasia to bring it up to modern standards? But like I was saying with Chester, I think there is, like, if you go back to a retro game like that, especially one that's concerned with story, I think there's just an almost ineffable magic to those quiet, um, low fidelity, uh, pixelated scenes that you get between characters, something like the training sequences of Chester by the campfire, where because they're so far removed from real life, I almost feel when I sit down and play something like Tales of Phantasia that I have to more actively engage my imagination to will myself into those scenes and think about everything that I'm not seeing, whether that's something like the pores on the characters' faces, or more to the point in something like this, the inner life of a character like Chester. And I recognize that a lot of that might be able to be reimagined according to modern standards, but I just hope that, especially among the next generation of gamers who are picking up these games, I hope that you take the time to go back to the first titles and appreciate them for everything they were in their original format, and not say, oh, I'm just going to wait for a remake because it's not going to be worth my time to do something that's that far from modern design standards. I hope that you at least give it a chance. Although I will say, one thing that was really fun to me and just another great advertisement for the Tales community was that I shared this article on the Tales sub, right, which I have a lot of love for. It's a great community, and several people said, "Oh, I'm so excited to read this. It looks really great. I'm not done with my Tales of Phantasia run for the first time yet. I'm in the middle of it, and so I'm just going to bookmark it for later because I don't want to spoil myself." And that to me is such a great endorsement of this fan base and the series, where the series has this magic where clearly, like, I hear comments like that and I have to imagine those are maybe younger fans who weren't around for the earlier games but who found the more recent releases that were released in the past few years, like Arise or Berseria or something like that, and fell in love with it so much that they fell down the rabbit hole of the series and wanted to explore everything and go back to the beginning, and cared so much about it that they treated it as if it were a new game that were released this year and wanted to avoid spoilers rather than finding out things ahead of time. And I think that's just such a rarity for so much popular culture these days, to care enough to go back to the beginning and not spoil yourself and be excited to talk about it with people afterwards. And it just to the way in which these fans, I think, embody the ethos of these games, all of the themes and practices that we talk about on this stream 3 times a week. I think I said this, but the other half of Dawn of the New World is this is also a good study for how oftentimes when I analyze games, and I think a lot of us when we interpret works of art kind of have something like this in mind, even if we don't consciously realize it. But there are core experiences in my life with games, especially when it comes to something as foundational as the Tales series, that I feel like I'm just always chasing and trying to answer. So one was solving the puzzle of Dawn of the New World, like we talked about. But the other, and this has kind of come up on the stream every now and again because it's oftentimes on my mind, is just the older I get and the more that I revisit this series, the more I realize how foundational Mythos is as a villain to me, where he was really like probably the first serious antagonist in a video game that I ever encountered. And he's a complicated one, like any of the Tales antagonists, I would say. And so I find myself constantly trying to reinterpret and revisit him, almost like I've said before. I think he's a character who the game wants you to believe cannot be saved, cannot be redeemed just because of who he is and the choices that he's made. But I almost feel like part of Aaron's brain is trying to figure out how to put all the pieces together to actually save this guy. Like I want to save him, even though I don't believe there's any way to do that. Right. So I imagine that probably comes through in the article too, but it was funny because I started that Tales of Symphonia section writing about Lloyd, and then I very quickly found my way to Mythos almost without realizing it. So there's a lot of both of them in there, but talk about things that, thinking about Chester differently made me think about differently in the other games. That little section at the end of the Tales of Symphonia part where I talk about the Walgaia scenes, where the Darius seal has trapped the party other than Lloyd in these illusions. That was such a gripping sequence to me as a kid, and this work really did help me to think about it in a slightly different light and understand how it's kind of an extension of not just Lloyd's principles, but in fact the way in which Lloyd is at the end of the day different from Mythos, even though Mythos at various points tries to con Lloyd into thinking that they're exactly the same. It's also, I talk about how these games call us to action and encourage us to think about our activity in real life differently. And one of the reasons I'm spending so much time on this series is because I really genuinely believe that. So an example for that with this Chester analysis, because I think it's going to be with me for quite a while, is two things. So first, within the Tales of Praxis series, I was teasing this before I published the article, but I think once you like see the way in which to look at characters who are not given focus in the narrative, like Chester, I think it naturally invites you and almost demands that you do the same thing with other similarly left out of the narrative characters in the series. So I almost did it in the article, and I thought, A, that would make things way too long and unwieldy, and B, especially with an eye to spoilers like we were talking about, I didn't want to make this one character study about Chester something that loops in characters from all these other games, because I wanted it to be accessible to gamers who didn't want to spoil themselves for these great games that have so many twists and turns. But characters like Zavid and Richard and Malik, in all the ways that we've already been talking about, and that's just off the top of my head. I'm sure we can pull more out of our hats. I think they're all amenable to similar questions of, okay, I notice these characters are not treated like run-of-the-mill party members in the way that we might expect. Why is that? What does that say about who they are, and what does that say about what this game is concerned with? So my hope is that it will open the door to similar character analyses as well. Raz, of course, another very easy and very potent example from Tales of Eternia. So when we get around to streaming that, you will know what of I speak. I can't believe I left him for last. And the other thing in real life, this is a more mundane example, but I think it shows just how directly and vividly these things can impact us when we really think about it. I stopped and thought about the sense I'd made of the resolve that Chester has and his capacity to just decide to act, recognizing that he doesn't have the context that he needs in order to fully process what he's working through, and that he never will. But you know what? He acts anyway, and he continues marching on as time's arrow. And it actually was like, I think that is a non-trivial element of why I've finally gotten off my ass and decided to try to get in shape by running every day, which I've always hated running. I was conned into doing cross country in middle school because I had long legs. But I recognized, my cardio is terrible. I want to take care of myself as I work into my 30s, starting at the end of this year, and the existential crisis that'll come with that. And thinking about and visualizing the praxis of Chester really helped me to get over my own mental block and think about a different paradigm for how to approach it in the first place. So if you're ever wondering the cash value of all the work that we do studying video games, it's because I really do think, as abstract as some of these analyses, though some of these analyses might be, I think that they actually can have a very measurable impact on what we decide to do on a daily basis once we really internalize these different thought processes. What else? Yeah, we talked about this a little with at the start of this with what you were saying, Pottery, about the idea of Chester versus the time travelers. I had this interesting related thought because I think I've mentioned this before on the stream. It's really interesting to me that in a series that by and large is not concerned with time travel at all, barring maybe that one event in Tales of Vesperia that we talked about before with Jormungand. The very first game is so deeply a time travel narrative, and that almost feels like a puzzle to me too. And one thing that was interesting to me, I didn't want to put it in the article because I felt like it would be a bridge too far, and I would need to do more analysis of my own to see whether it really feels right to me. But I had this sense after spending so much time with Chester, like we were talking about, I feel like there's a way in which his willingness to act and continue moving in one direction, to me is almost more inspiring and more of a model of what to emulate coming out of Tales of Phantasia than all of the time traveling work that the rest of the party does that is not concerned with cause and effect, but crisscrosses reality and different timelines to get this kind of artificial and unfair understanding of themselves almost. So I almost felt like maybe the trick of it, just maybe, is that it's a time travel story where the lesson at the end of the day is that you want to emulate the guy who doesn't time travel. So kind of an anti-time travel story. Again, I wouldn't put a flag in the ground right now and say that that's my settled opinion on it, but I thought it was an interesting thought to have in mind. In terms of where we go next, I'm not sure. I'm going to take this, especially at the beginning of the year, as an opportunity to kind of do a thorough accounting of everything that we've been through on the stream, the different things we've talked about that might be good for studies before I really decide what to study next. But one thought that I had as I was running today was that something I did actually way back when I was studying Majora's Mask that I haven't emulated since is that as I was working through a bunch of different individual studies of that game, I think twice in the series, I stopped and did these things that I called interludes, where I kind of took a step back and thought more globally about what I was doing in the series, how it related to broader considerations of literary analysis and the value of video games and stuff like that. So I had this kind of half thought in my head that now that we have a decent number of these articles under our belt, how many do we have at this point? I think maybe my gut says 5, but let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 if you count my lecture, which I do at PAX West on Tales of Arise. I'm concerned to make sure that we are not just studying these games in a vacuum or in these vacuums of comparative studies, but that insofar as it makes sense to, we're also building towards a collective understanding of what the series as a whole is concerned with. So I'm cautiously interested in taking a step back and just taking stock of the different theses that I've drawn from the games in these written studies and saying, as I began to do at the end of this article on Chester, comparing it with my study of Demlos and De Nomos, okay, if we ask what is the overall praxis of the Tales games, what is the model for a philosophy of action and identity and all these other concerns we talk about all the time that it's trying to express to us, what's the story so far? When we put all these pieces together, what's the picture that emerges? So I don't know if now is the moment to do that, but it's something that's on my mind and that I hope to do at some point. So I wanted to share that with everyone too. I'm going to switch to the chat because I've been monologuing and I appreciate your patience with that, but I feel like it's a good way to get all the context out there. But as I catch up on the chat, Pottery, I will also say for your benefit, as I promised, after I was done with the article, I did turn back to Inscription, and I thought more than you would expect about how to tell you where I was without spoiling anything, because as you know, it's that kind of game, and I don't want to spoil for people who haven't played. I reached the point where you get a new option on the main menu. And I think that's as best I could manage as a way of explaining it with giving away virtually no spoilers. But I will tell you, and I'm sure you can expect based just on that, it is continuing to melt my brain. I got there at the perfect point of last night where it was late. I was just tired enough for it to really melt my sense of reality and merge me with the game and all of that stuff. There you go. So that was my intuition, but having not played the game before, I didn't have a firm sense of how its acts were going to be broken down or even if it had acts. But yes, so I imagine it won't take much longer for me to get through it at this rate, not least of which because when I went back to it, I immediately regretted putting it down because I had lost all my facility with the card game. So, oh boy, it took a bunch of pretty junky runs before I could make it to that point. So, hoping to power through to the end. Good. All right, let me catch up on this, and then we can pivot to Tales of Grace's F. Oh, we talking. I love it. Yeah, I'm with you. I definitely got that same feeling on the difference between playing and appreciating Dawn of the New World. And I almost feel like that is something I might be interested in writing about at some point, because especially with games like the Tales games where there's so much story and thematic content, but also such sophisticated battle systems. Like, I think it is very easy to draw a distinction between enjoying the act of playing it and appreciating what it has to say, which is kind of a joke, but also I think the more that we can appreciate that distinction, the more, even if it's not our favorite combat system, or if we're shaking our fists at the world for Zisteria having the most obtuse and undesirable equipment system in the world, we can still step back and appreciate it and value it for what it's trying to share with us within the context of the broader series. Yeah, okay, Grail. So you were ahead of the curve in terms of appreciating the story, at least, of Dawn right away. It's it's taken some of us longer to work our way around to it, but you're a pathfinder as always. I know. Well, we'll have to figure out whether and how to do a bridge to Final Fantasy at some point, because I'm certainly at the point, like I've been saying over the last week, that I need to pivot back to the Final Fantasy VII corpus in the next month to be ready for a rebirth. Everyone take a deep breath and buckle up and hold the hand of your loved one. It's going to be okay no matter what happens. But yeah, there, like I think I've said before, the majority of Final Fantasy games, I think the majority still, are ones that I haven't played, and 6 is constantly on my list too. So I definitely hope to get to it at some point. I tried last year. I got a few hours into it, and then I think I just got distracted by deciding to submerge myself in all of Tales instead, which I don't regret. Yeah, I think that's fair, Grail, in terms of the early 3D games. I think when I was talking about like the difference in representational quality, I had in mind more, let's say, from Phantasia to Eternia, right? I think there was a pretty distinct jump up to Symphonia, where because of that jump, they were able to do something like get away with doing a remake that is really a remaster, just updating the graphical style and the stylizations that they already had, rather than trying to make it look like Tales of Arise or something, which I imagine we'd agree would be an exercise in futility that kind of misses the mark in terms of what it was concerned with in the first place. But maybe that's a hot take. I feel like sometimes I don't know. Oh, I didn't even realize that my post was in the hot rising tag. That's cool. Yeah, I'll tell you. Like I said, Grail, I have a lot of love for the, really for all of the, not all of the gaming subreddits, but I think especially when there are niche communities around games that are so thoughtful that the community also has a really thoughtful approach to them, the overall tenor of the subreddit can be really positive, and these nice little bastions of communities you actually want to be a part of in the broader horrorscape of Reddit, where that is, let's say, maybe not always the case, right? But yeah, I had gotten into this funny habit of sharing my articles with them without actually explaining the broader project that I was doing. So a few months ago, I decided to just make a post saying, "Hey, if you didn't know, I'm doing this. I love these games. If you're interested in following along, love to get people to check it out." And there was like a really humbling amount of recognition that came from that. I love that it's the kind of community where not only are people interested in reading and engaging with this stuff, but also, like I've said before, where they really seem to have internalized the value of the diverse party, which is a constant in all of these games. So that even if someone is, doing fan art where you don't do fan art, right? Or, making memes where memes aren't your thing, you can look at what someone else is doing with the series and appreciate it in a way that helps you to appreciate that creator and also see the series in a different light. I think that's something that's really magical. Andros. What about Andros pottery? I'm having a stroke. What are you talking about? Is it a key name or character that I've already forgotten? Or are you memeing and I just can't follow along? Yeah, Van too, Grail. I appreciate Mythos because I think arriving at Mythos first and then not getting to Van until like a significant number of years later, probably 5 or 6 years later, I had enough critical distance to appreciate Van without getting like stuck in that puzzle box about him, which I think it's largely thanks to that I was able to put together the kind of Tales of the Abyss study that I did. But he's definitely one of those source code guys, no doubt about that. Oh, from Star Fox? Okay, got it. Star Fox is another one of those gaming classics that I have never gotten off my list, but as we've talked about to death, the list is always too long, so we gotta pick and choose with that. Yeah, and I mean that's a big part of why I was revisiting Mythos, because I think that last line of his in Darius Garlon is it's so iconic. He's so resolute in it, and it was one of those things where it's always been a brain bug for me that's never really left my mind. And then by the time I got through thinking about Mythos in relation to Chester, I was like, wow, this is the most Chester thing that a guy could possibly say. And isn't that so sad that Mythos has basically, of his own accord, boxed him into the limited perspective and inability to relate to others that Chester comes by just by virtue of the accidental trauma that he stumbled into through no fault of his own. So I imagine that probably won't be the last time I revisit that line, but it was a touching one for sure. I know, and that's the tricky thing, Grail, right? With those source code villains, it's like you want them to remain as this kind of artifact for you to consider and wrestle with, I think, over your life, especially when they're constructed in a way that is conducive to that. Now, I will say, for what it's worth, much love to everyone over at the Final Fantasy franchise, because Final Fantasy Remake did convince me that there are ways to breathe new life into similarly iconic villains in a way that doesn't spoil the original but adds new nuance that is kind of only possible because of the journeys that we have been on to understand the original villain over the years. So I wouldn't say it's impossible, but it's definitely a high bar to meet. There's no doubt about that. Ooh, I hadn't thought of that, Pottery. The idea of, yeah, treating Patty as someone who was left out because she was left out of the original game. But I love that. Yeah, that totally gels with the way in which I distinguished the definitive edition from the original at the end of that comparative study I did. Well, I'll have to put that on my list. That's a fun one. Yeah. Characters who become main focuses, but because of their origin, we aren't really treated in the same way as the other characters. Because that's one of the things that is weird about Patty, right? She's a main focus, but because of the design and structure of the game, especially if you're coming from the original, she feels very spliced in. So it's almost like it's kind of like a mirror of someone like Chester, in the sense that, like, it feels weird that the game is giving her so much focus because she wasn't there at all prior to that. Oh, yeah, I'll have to mull that more, definitely. Yeah, I'm with you. I don't feel the pull as much for Flynn as with Patty for the reasons that you're talking about, but worth keeping in mind. I wasn't even keeping track of the counter. I feel like maybe I mentioned Vesperia first this time, but it's anyone's game. It's article publication stream time though, so I mean, odds were good that that timer was going to be blown between the first minute and the second minute. No, and Grail, I think I said this kind of half in jest and half just underdeveloped the last time we were talking about it, because Pottery, I remember you asked a really pointed question about, well, if the voice acting is kind of weird and under-directed in Tales of Eternia, does it serve some point in the broader story? And I hadn't really thought about that before you raised it, but the more I thought about what really draws me to Eternia and what I think the heart of those themes are, the more I actually do think, like, yes, there is a clear function that the weirdness of that voice acting serves, which is in fact a big part of why I would never want it to be remade, and I want it to stay exactly as it is in history. So when we stream it, when I publish on it, put a pin in that, because I'm really stoked to talk about it. I'm glad we came back to the voice acting. I know, I'm sorry. It's weird. And I can't be the only gamer like this though. Like, I definitely will be the first to admit that I missed many of, like, the kid game classics growing up. But that can't just be me, right? Like, I have to imagine Rare is the kid who just happened to sit down and play through all of the classics. And then I feel like once you're an adult, you're more concerned with the the inscriptions of the bunch, right? The games that are really going to speak to you based on where you are now. So I feel like it's a weird situation of having gaps in your gaming history that a lot of people have, but maybe I'm just trying to justify my own ignorance. I will say, like, I've had random play sessions with, my friends in school when I was growing up, where one of them would happen to have Star Fox, and so we'd play a few minutes of it or something. I don't consider that having really played Star Fox, because, like, that villain's name means nothing to me, as I was saying. Yep. Grail, I love that Mythos quote, because you even just type it and I can hear so vividly the tone in which he says ridiculous in my head. Just so derisive and dismissive. Talk about great voice acting performances. That's probably a big part of why he does stick in my head. That, and just the difference in even the voice acting between when he's pretending to be the party's friend and then when he's revealed himself. That's another thing that I was going back to try to wrestle with the puzzle of, because I mentioned this before on the stream, but that sequence where he's living in the party and becoming friends with Genus is just, the older I've gotten and revisiting that last year, like, that is so haunting and sad and kind of gross to me, just deeply unsettling, especially when you know where it's going. So I really wanted to try to get in his head in this study about that. I hope that it was at least useful what I said about it, if not the final word on it. Yeah. So he's one of those villains who made his bed and has to lie in it, right? It's definitely a different vibe, the definitive edition, than something like Grace's, where, yeah, we had to wait, but we got to have the kind of final cut with all of it voiced at the same time. But, that's one of the things that I love about Tales of Praxis too, is, like, as we're working through all of the games collectively, you start to appreciate the way in which they're all weirdly different from each other. Even the final cuts that we get, they all have their own kind of idiosyncrasies like that. That could almost be an interesting study too, just looking at the different weird characters of unexpected attributes of the different versions that we get. So I think people oftentimes just look at those as quirks and write them off, but there might be something more interesting to say there. That's right. You were a Nintendo kid, Pottery, so big same, big me. I think that's a big part of why I miss stuff too. I still remember a big part of what inspired me to finally get a PlayStation was I was a little bit older, and I started literally having dreams that I was playing Kingdom Hearts, even though I'd never played Kingdom Hearts before, because it was just in the ether, and I knew enough about it from my friends talking about it that I knew it would be something that I would really get into. So talk about having a subconscious urge to fill your gaps. Banjo-Kazooie is another gap of mine. Although, while we're hanging and talking articles, one of my favorite, very whimsical love letters to Banjo-Kazooie was actually published back when the site was publishing this series that Dan started on building, like, a literary canon of video games. And one of my dear friends and colleagues, not Dan, but a great guy and creator by the name of Jaron R.M. Johnson, in preparation for a panel we were giving about the series, wrote this homage to Banjo-Kazooie. So if you're hungry for more Banjo-Kazooie content, check that out at some point. It's a very fun read. All right, friendos. Well, I will end where I began, with just gratitude for Tales of Praxis in its many forms. This was an article, as well as the Vesperia and Destiny article, where I was so grateful for the interplay between my studies and the stream, because so much of what was in that was only due to the conversations that we've had on here. And all the better, like I said, that I can count on my thoughtful Praxis gamers to read it almost an instant after it was published and be excited to talk about it on the stream. So truly, I hope I don't take that lightly. I appreciate it. And like I said, and was forecasting before I published it, I really hope, especially with these articles that are just kind of lenses derived from one game that can then be picked up and put elsewhere, I hope it's the kind of thing that we can keep talking about and thinking about and applying to these other games as we work through them. like I alluded to with some of the characters in Graces, I see a lot of connective tissue here. So I imagine it will be living with us for quite a while, but fasten your seatbelts because I'm already excited about whatever comes next on the stream and in the publications. Grail, outing yourself as someone who reads footnotes. I love that. It was a good comment. No, I really did. I unironically loved that. And I hope you know enough not to have seen that footnote as a dig at you or anything like that, because that was my first impulse too. Like, especially when I sat down and played Symphonia for the first time, I remember thinking, wow, this is such a thoughtful meditation on discrimination, because that's certainly such a huge part of the series. But I found myself thinking, like, there's just too much in these 3 games to all wrap around that. But that definitely feels like it's lurking all over the place. Discrimination and racism, I mean. So why is that? How can we make sense of that? So I think, like I said in that footnote, I think no analysis of those games is adequate without addressing racism and discrimination. And so hopefully my further views and interpretations of those games naturally dovetails with that in a way that makes sense. All right. Well, we're going to switch to Tales of Graces F. I'm going to pour one out for my homie Chester, metaphorically speaking, just in gratitude. I think we talked about this before I published the article, but and I wrote it in the article too. It's so easy, I think, to see characters who are underrepresented in a game as either not that interesting, or if you are interested in them, like the creators of the game did something wrong by not giving them more playtime and more quests and stuff like that. But I think that's one of the things that can be really valuable about sitting down and thinking about what it is to read a game, because when you're just sitting down and playing, oftentimes these sort of literary interpretive aspects, like a character who's left out to make a point, or the idea that characters can be narratively unreliable, like what's being said isn't always the truth. They're things that seem obvious when you're talking about maybe literature like a book, or when you step back and think about it. But oftentimes, at least this is the case for me, maybe it's not the case for you, like when you're just sucked into a game and dialed in and experiencing it in the moment, it's easy not to have those things on your mind because you're just along for the ride and buying into whatever the game is giving you. So that, as much as anything, is a part of why I hope these written works can be a supplement to what we're doing on the stream, because it's one amazing thing to work through these games moment to moment and think about those moments together. And then I think it's another thing that is supplemental and valuable to step back and look at the overall experience and ask, what were they trying to say there? What is the overall shape of this trying to express to us, both in terms of the space that things are given and the negative space, the things that are left out, like Chester. So Chester, the iconic archer in gaming, as far as I am concerned. And thank you for all that you've done, my friend. I hope that you've finally found a way to make peace with Ami and with your life. That's my hope. And I'll switch the input here. I think it's reasonable for us to get close. So I'm looking at and I'll switch over. So, and I need to toggle my stupid video capture card because it never is working these days. Asbel's at level 77 right now, Grail. So if it is just a matter of getting him to level 80, I think that's reasonable. All right. There we go. Oh, that is exciting, Pottery. That means something to me because it means something to you. Have these games taught us nothing? Is it a good trade for you guys? I know you said last time you mentioned hockey that your team simply couldn't stop winning. So is it going to make them even more unbeatable, or what's the beat there? All right. So we have 2 hours, and we're on the precipice of the conclusion of the F arc. So this might work out well. And I figured if we had extra time, obviously we'll talk about it, and we can also just start the post game, which will be a lot of fun because I know we at least have an EX dungeon to work through. I figured it would be a fun way to revisit things as we're working up to the conclusion of F, just to mention some of the themes and concepts that have been on our mind going through the entire almost 100 hours of this. So this is not an exhaustive list by any means, but as I was sitting down and thinking about it, these were some of the ones that were on the top of my mind. And if there are any that I omit that you want to add to the list, feel free to call it out in the chat. But so this was a big game for thinking about titles, what it is to have a title assigned to you, to use a certain title to gain different abilities, to think about how titles define us or limit us, and kind of the other side of that coin, naming. So we have the actual titles that are assigned to describe people, but also the names that are attached to them, like Asbel naming Sophie, Asbel giving Sophie her last name, Sophie conveying her name to Fermat's child. It was Fermat who had a child, right? So a lot of key moments of naming and thinking about what it is to have a name. Sophie versus Protos Haste, things like that. The idea of nature versus nurture and wrestling with who we are now versus what our heritage tells us to be and what the people who raise us tell us to be. As Grail, I think it was you who called out that idea of nature versus nurture, and has been a deep part of our journey with Sophie, and of course Lambda. I think they're kind of the two pillars of that. The question of how we square our changing identities with our communities and whether we're good or bad for them. That comes up in the microcosm in terms of, Asbel making sense of what it is to be a lord, or Richard coming to terms with the kind of king he wants to be, especially in the aftermath of everything that happened in the first 3 acts. Malik making sense of his time in Fendel versus his identity after he left. But now, of course, also it's worth remembering that in the macrocosm, because there's the whole idea of whether humans are good or bad for the world, for the cosmos. So that's definitely on the top of our mind. And then how we hang on to our sense of an individual identity despite membership in groups and collectives beyond ourselves, which ties in and kind of rhymes with all the other themes we've talked about, but is also something important to surface again at the end. Because remember, one of the key questions here is, as far as we can understand, if Asbel gives over his body to Lambda to absorb all the Eleth from Fodra, he's going to, at least temporarily, totally dissipate and dissociate from an individual sense of self. And so then the question is, how, if at all, will he be able to find his way back to that? Which, the more I was thinking about it, feels like a very nice kind of metaphysical reflection of that very human theme that we've been asking and answering throughout the game of, who am I if not the sum of my groups? Which, like I said, rhymes with a lot of the other stuff that we've talked about. All right. All right, it's an upgrade. There you go. Well, upgrade seems like all we can hope for. Well, definitely keep us posted. I am not a sport guy, but I love hearing about sports from people who care about it. So that'll be fun. Yeah, this is a great point about the name of the game itself. I definitely feel like the more time I have spent with the games, even those where I was skeptical of the title in the first place, the more I can work my way into understanding why it was titled in the way it was. Like, you may or may not have noticed the moment in the article where I call out the idea of the character relationships and world navigation in Symphonia harmonizing with one another in a very symphonic way. But that's certainly not to say that all of the games are equally accessible in terms of the purpose of the title and how it connects with the story. But yeah, I'm with you guys. I think the notion of treating people with grace, keeping relationships in your good graces, a lot of these conflicts that the game is concerned with addressing and resolving, like we've talked about before, really have to do more with the unwinding and reconsideration of relationships than with any kind of ideological conflict between different nations or antagonist versus protagonist in the way that we would expect from a lot of other games. And so I think it might be a consequence of that, with it being more interpersonal relationship first, that even though the idea of relationships and the idea of grace is probably commonplace across these games, it seems very front and center and anchoring in this particular game. Oh, word, our team is good? See, this is literally the first time I've even heard that, Pottery. So there you go. You can teach me how to be a hockey fan, at least well enough that I can pose as one, and that'll help me in social situations here, if nothing else. Plan takes shape. Excellent. I love it. All right. Good. Well, here we are. Yeah, I figured, I know there are definitely some chests and stuff in the depths, like you were saying, Grail. And like I said, I had intended to get those today. I just ran out of time. I imagine I might just go back tomorrow and do that, honestly, because I think especially with the momentum that we have tonight, it might be a bummer to start with just grinding through those areas. But since Asbel is so close to the level for that title that you were talking about, I figure it might make sense just to go back down to the ground floor, so to speak. And there are some more chests down there to get to, I'm sure. And we can see if we naturally reach that level just by fighting some more of those poor crystal rock monstrosities. I think the easiest way to go is up here, and then we can warp all the way back down to the bottom. Oh, yes, so I mentioned my pins, and then I was too excited about catching up with you to actually name them, but if you didn't make them from the bigger shot before, we have an homage to all the games I was talking about. So I have the new series pin that I was so excited about getting, and Lloyd Irving as a conductor, speaking of symphonies, from that 2018 Tales Symphony that they did in Japan, Emil as a trumpeter, and Mint from Tales of Phantasia, because as Chester is left out of the story, so too is he left out of the pen collection. Oh, which reminds me, I think we have exactly 1 day of Japan show and tell left in us. So I'm looking because I put the stuff on my desk to show and tell with you, but you know, it's a wrapping up an epic 100-hour journey day. It's talking about and discussing and digging into a new publication day. I think we can save the further show and tell until Friday. Especially since, as you said, new record before we actually got into the game. How about that? But a lot of things to cover off today, so it makes sense. Wait, can you say more about that, Grail? The idea that, are you saying that the games, Tales of Graces and Tales of Hearts, are games that you think of as side quests, or am I misunderstanding you? That's a really interesting idea, but I don't know how to wrap my head around it. So can you say more? I'll just make sure. I think I got all of our items good. Yeah, so oh, and quickly, since like I said, I got these off stream, but so the party's a little beefier. And the items that I got just from the first part of this dungeon, because I cleared that, were in honor of one of Grail's favorite titles. I don't know if you would say this is your favorite with a capital F, Grail, but I know you love it whenever it comes up. Sharia's daggers, which are an homage to Tales of Innocence. And we got Pascal's shot staff, which is an homage to Radiant Mythology. Those wonderful little side games that feature guest appearances from characters throughout the series. Said to put the world in your hands with its potential for divinity or depravity, which got me very excited to play the one and only one of those which has been localized, which I do have sitting and waiting for me once I'm done with Legendia, because I think that's one of the ones that they bring into it. And then, speaking of Legendia, the Sword of Legendia. Said no one would ever manage to get their hands on this. So those were the 3 weapon pickups, but I did a lot of dualizing too, got some much fancier recipes, amongst other things. So we'll see how much it actually helps our kit, but I'm feeling a lot better about the gang's prospects now. Okay, I think this is the... Oh, we don't have that warp point. Well, hopefully this will be it then. Oh, interesting. Okay, so you mean they're kind of like side quests relative to each other? Like they bolster and reflect on the same themes and ideas? That is very interesting. Yeah, I do remember you saying that, now that you mention it before. Because I said, I think, at the time, at least in the part of Hearts that I've gotten through so far, I almost feel more resonance with Tales of Symphonia and Tales of the Abyss, in terms of the way in which we're working on reconstituting a fractured person. But along with Inscription, it is on my very short list to get back to Hearts. I was hoping to do some of that this evening after the stream, in fact, if I can pull myself away from Inscription. So I'm excited to see how that plays out, and you better believe we'll be continuing to talk about it. Ah, here we go. I forgot we didn't have a super direct passage to the core at this point. That must be the last warp point that we're missing, which is probably right before the final boss. Alright, so... I'm going to resist the urge to break out my guide right away, and we're just going to fight some enemies and see if we can find all the other chests on our way in here.
Okay, let's do this.
Oh my god, how did Xillia get one-shotted? Oh, that is funny, Barry. That would be another fun analysis to do at some point, looking at different versions of the same weapon that come up across a bunch of different games. Or armor. Mundane comes to mind. Or for weapons, Excalibur, of course. God, Xillia has some big Rose energy coming into this first battle. Alright, well, maybe I should have done a little more grinding than I did, but got a feeling we'll pretty quickly catch up with these battles. Fearsome Essence. Ooh, that's very cool. Especially when we're quickly approaching the source of life's essence in this cosmos, I guess, as far as we understand it. Doesn't seem like life comes from anywhere else. Yeah, okay, fair. Thank you for resetting our expectations, Grail. That's a good point.
Will never falter.
Burial Blade Master, alright. You can never have enough titles. That was one thing I was noodling today. I don't know if it'll be the next thing I write, but I do really want to talk about titles, and I want to talk about them in Graces. And
Shall we begin?
I think there is something interesting, and I want to say non-trivial, about the way in which Graces just truly buries you in titles, compared to, I think, all of the other Tales games I've played, at least. I don't think it's an accident that there are mechanically so many titles to get, and it takes, like we were talking about last time, so much effort to really fill them out and get all of their potential in a game that is so concerned with the nature of titles and its story explicitly as well. Not the Elith break.
To the sky! Make way!
Ugh. When your combo stops at 23 hits, so you just missed the Mystic Art. There we go. I was just saving it for the end. It was all part of the plan.
Is everyone okay? How bad are your wounds?
Oh yeah, that would definitely be very cool, wouldn't it? It is nice, at least in the broader universe of Tales AI, that they give you the option to play with the strategy for when the characters use their Excel. Like, granted, it could be better, but at least that's a degree of control that you might not expect from some of the other games. Fatal Attraction: clothing worn by a couple who turn their blades upon each other when their love soured. Wow. That reminds me of, I'm never going to remember it, but one of the shrines that Dan took me to in Japan was like the source of this famous like piece of horror and ghost story folklore in Japan about like a marriage that went wrong and ended in violent tragedy, which I guess is a fabrication. That's not really what happened, but it gave birth to one of the like most famous pieces of Japanese theater, which is still performed all the time. He compared it to something like Hamlet, basically, in terms of its popularity. All right, that's not gonna be great. Gonna be great for anyone. Oh, we already have a Fatal Attraction +1, anyways. That might be good for Sophie, actually. Bump up her CC. Alright, I'm gonna do that. Well, the deep game grail is you just need to round up 3 of your closest friends and get them to commit to doing a 100-hour playthrough with you so that then you never have to rely on the AI, right? It's easy to do that, right, guys? Right? I'll confess, I peeked at the map of this area just because I was using the guide to hunt chests earlier, like I said, so it kind of looked like it just goes upward in waves. Or switchbacks, if you prefer. So even knowing that gives me a mental model for how to go about it, which helps poor Aaron. Love me a trove of hourglasses. Classic late game shenanigans. The real question is, will Aaron be able to save any of his really good items for the post game, or is he going to use them all in the final boss? It's always the question. Better you than me, Grail. I admire that because I always just feel like support is too much for me to wrap my head around. Because I default to always thinking about attacking and dealing with the enemy, so having to do that while also being responsible for keeping the party healthy is pretty tough. Although I guess even playing Asbel here, like, I need to have half an eye on the party's well-being and, you know, use items or issue commands as appropriate to keep them alive, so maybe it's not that different. Yeah, that's true. I did, I fell back in love with dualizing during my little pregame today because there was a lot that I hadn't touched in a while between getting new recipes and dualizing some of the charms since I learned my lesson in the depths, stuff like that. I dualized some of the gems too, which was something I hadn't done in a while, so hopefully everyone's stats are a little bit better at least.
Are you okay?
I am now.
Learn how to dodge. Oh no. I feel like that was something I was doing quite a bit in the earlier game, and then I just lost the focus on it as I was trying to learn more of the arts and wailing on enemies. So good. I will try to get back in the habit of doing plenty of good dodging.
I'll settle this. Fall before me. Burning Phoenix. Strike. Roar. Charge.
Oh, drag. Richard's Excel finality canceled mine. I didn't realize that was a thing. Oh well. I'll let you have it, Richard. You need the W after everything you went through in the first 3 acts. Wow, those sound like some advanced tactics, Grail. Well, I will try to keep that in mind, but no promises that I'll be able to pull it off. Jesus. There was a dodge.
Is everyone okay? How bad are your wounds?
Hey, our boy got shooting stars. That's something. Yeah, they're not leveling everyone up quite as quickly as I expected, given what a long haul they are. But that's alright. Yeah, fair enough. Maybe it just sounded more complicated than it really is.
Stay safe, everyone.
Take this! Okay, let destruction reign! Eat this! To the death! You're mine! Yeah! Roar! Lightning blade! Fall before me!
Fairy circle.
Killed everyone!
I beseech of you the gift of rebirth. Light, take care and grant thy blood.
Take this!
Sword, use me.
Fall before me! Sorry about that.
I beseech of you.
It's a beautiful spell.
Light, take one.
Now! Not yet! Die!
In between stars and shade, you've got the whole balance of light and dark. So much the better.
Silver! Shining blade of triumph! Lightning blade!
Ooh, that's a very cool ability. Yeah, it would definitely be helpful. But we'll survive either way. I have confidence in us at this point. We've made it this far. My god, what could possibly stop us at this point? He said, totally jinxing the rest of the run.
What was that?
Oh, off in the far distance, I think I can see where we're headed. This is quite the approach, even by Tales standards. EB Life. That is a very descriptive title, definitely. It definitely won't hurt our chances of this. Or maybe I'll even just look through the titles for Sophie and Sharia, because I feel like having that on our healers especially would be useful.
Shining blade of triumph! Come get us exciting! Soul Reaper! Come get us exciting! Silver! You and me, Lambda! Here's the sky! Radiant light, strike forth! Divine Golgar! Silver! Rip to pieces! Stampede strike!
This lord is on fire! Busybody, okay, excellent.
You're gone! Let destruction reign! There!
Sword assault! Scattering shot! No mercy!
Let destruction reign!
Let me praise you!
No escape! Get wall! In a flash! Plasma shot! Calm, rested Richard, we got this! Ha! Like the old days.
Alright. Now we're getting some levels popping at least. Yeah, I was thinking I put something improving experience in the mixer, but I guess we just hadn't been fulfilling the conditions to proc it. Elixir! Alright. Oh man. They know how to make me scared for a final boss though, giving you 5 hourglasses and 5 elixirs on the run-up. Dios mio. I love how the sound of the core's radiation is getting just progressively stronger as we get closer to.
Okay,
It's subtle, but unmistakable. Maybe I'll check if we have that too. I'm realizing I forgot to look at Cherry's title also. I'll try to remember to pause after this battle. I just get so hypnotized by the surrounds that I immediately go back to navigating.
Rip to pieces! Stampede strike!
yeah, here's your mercy!
Probably overkill.
Radiant light strike force! Divine Golgar!
Oh, never mind. Oh my god. The overkill is their HP.
Hold it off, somehow.
Nice. Alright. EXP bonus, and we killed them during their Elith break, which is pretty great. Ah, that's a great point, Grail. Good to keep in mind. I hadn't realized that. Alright, so we were looking for Busybody. I remember getting that, but I don't remember where it sits. Is it one that we already advanced? Does she have it already? There it is. Oh yeah, EB life. Elith burst equals revives from KO. Now that's some math I can get behind. Yeah, well, and that's one of those technical nuances, Grail, that I wish we learned a little bit more about. Because we get a little about Eleth density and the way in which sometimes it can be diffuse, or else it can be more dense if it's contained in Creus, or if it crystallizes. But regardless, yeah, I get the sense that these rock monsters are just ultra dense, whereas the Little Queen is maybe a more direct emanation from the core, but also much more diffuse in the way that she just scatters and replicates and everything. So interesting to have those two extremes as we're advancing toward the end here. Alright, so I was going to do that, and we were going to look at the mixer also. Experience. Oh, well, there's one that halves all of our stats except accuracy, but doubles experience. That that strikes me as a bad idea right now. Is there another one? Restores Eleth whenever you defeat a high-level enemy. That might be a good one for now. Oh yeah, that's another interesting explanation for how the rock monsters might deal with those crystals above, because we were talking about that last time, and that idea didn't come up, Grail, but yeah, like almost like there's a sufficient density to their Eleth that it is like has something almost gravitational to it, where it just pulls in all the other Eleth of the same type from the crystal, and that's how it causes the crystal to shatter and solves your problems. Yeah, it doesn't look like we have any other experience gain book options right now, unfortunately, but that's okay. Did we go in this direction already? I don't think so. Oh, no worries. It's good to know that we have it. Just probably not the right time for it. Oh, I might have turned myself around. Unless there's a chest over here. This is when I wish I had used the map. Oh yeah. Well, that's okay. Now we know. All the way back. Doesn't seem like the enemies respawn though. So we just get a little extended walk. Didn't even have to do the hokey pokey. That's how good I am at turning myself around. Hypnotizing is a great word for it. Yep, I feel that vividly. It reminds me a little bit of the mind space in which Lambda confronts Asbel, or flip it, reverse it, Asbel confronts Lambda. That same kind of trance state, if you will. Alright, so mental note to Aaron, we were heading to the right when we started this battle. Hopefully saying it out loud will help me to avoid making the same mistake. No, it's cool. I took your hockey comment as an explanation for where you would be, Pottery. One of those things where people are really losing their minds, I guess, huh? I think really any breed or subsection of Twitter is a funny place. Even gaming Twitter, I mean, I'll obviously talk about gaming sometimes on Twitter out of necessity, but I don't know if I consider myself a part of gaming Twitter per se. Oh man, 40? Wow. I can only imagine that means your brother is insane at fighting games, Grail, because I have a pretty clear picture in my head of you being insane at fighting games. So it says a lot that he got the better of you in terms of record. Were you just having an off day, or does he know the game better than you, or is he just even better at fighting games than you are?
What was that?
It was the heart of darkness, Richard. Come on in. Colonel Kurtz has been expecting you. Okay, there's a chest over there, and there's a chest here. Good. Oh, it's a Richard figure. Well, that's nice. So you don't even have to worry about dualizing. They straight up give you one if you want to use him in the main game. It seems like a kindness on the part of the developers. Look at that, how it's, I guess, just such a high concentration of Elith that you get this Aurora Borealis effect just seeping off of the stones. Man, yeah, there's a lot going on in this area. It's one that kind of seems deceptively simple when you walk in, but then the more you progress and see all the little details, you realize that while it doesn't look the same as the lush greenery up above, it too is teeming with life. Overdrive Prince. And we reset the Vesperia timer again. That just makes me wish we could port all of these to repeats back, though. That would be fun.
I can't lose.
I see, so you got into them later than he did. I feel like oftentimes that can make a difference, especially when you're talking about when you're young and really absorb all of the movesets and tactics and stuff, when you don't even have to think about them.
I'll settle this. Fall before me. Burning Phoenix.
Yeah, well, and especially when it's your brother, I can imagine he knows, all of your habits and the way to get the better of you. It can be fun having that kind of partner, I think, but definitely a double-edged kind of fun. Yeah, I think that makes sense, Grail. I assume there's going to be a warp point coming up before the point of no return, right? Or do you think it's we need to go back now? I can't imagine we need to go back now. Because there's one more warp point up to the shuttle that we haven't unlocked yet. Like, those extra years of experience will really do it. Yeah, I'm willing to bet on there being a warp. Like I said, I'm like 99% sure we're still missing one. The good thing about these enemies is they're so dense that I feel like shooting stars doesn't pull them in all that much. How much is going to move these giant hunks of rock and Elith and whatever else? It's hilarious that he was paralyzed for most of his Elith days.
Nice, Richard. That was impressive. Well, I'm nowhere near your level, Asbel.
Had I gotten the one over here? This is... Oh, good. See, in that time I was going to talk myself out of going this way because I thought I was turning myself around, so I'm glad I fought that impulse. 3 arcane bottles, alright. I'm scared. I'm scared. Ah, that looks like a war point, if ever I've seen one.
Stay safe, everyone.
They're definitely more niche in this game than they are in something like Zesty and Bestie. Useful to have, though. Again, I wonder whether I'll be able to hold on to any of them through this fight. Seems Kurt isn't the only one in this game who shouts out animal names. I forgot that Asbel just shouts out dragon when he uses Ice Dragon Fang or whatever it's called. I hadn't even clocked that quote, Grail, but that has such big Farah energy to me, and I love it for that reason. She is a pretty dang good cheerleader. Oh, did we get a new sword? That looked like it dropped a sword, and I think it had Phantasia in its name? Fact Phantasia. A Krius art sword that can pull truth from illusion and find dreams anywhere you go. How about that? On a night, the day after I published a Phantasia study. Sometimes things just come together. How is it on Asbel? Gives him better CC. But my god, at what cost? Well, it'll be nice to enhance it, but I don't think it's worth losing everything else right now. Because Radiant Hell is pretty beefed up. To no one's surprise. Oh, the skip before the final boss is one big happy family. I love that. Oh, this 4th act. Fuck you for not playing this the first time, little Aaron. You had so much to learn and you didn't even realize it. Although, the more I think about it, I think there is something telling and perhaps all the more appropriate that maybe I didn't play the 4th act when I was younger because I wasn't ready for the development that was going to happen in the 4th act at that age. I needed to develop more myself before I could see the merit to it. Art imitates life, imitates art.
As a daughter, it's now my responsibility to carry on Asbel's legacy. I must do everything I can to carry his hopes and dreams into the
100%
future.
Gru.
If Asbel is your father, does that make Sharia your mother?
Yes. And Pascal is my big sister, and the captain is my grandfather. Hubert used to be my big brother, but if I'm Asbel's child, I guess he's my uncle now.
I see.
So you can be my new big brother, Richard.
Oh.
Who, me? Your big brother, is it?
Well done, sire. You're the last to join the family and still nabbed the best position.
Would you like me to massage your shoulders for you, Grandpa?
That would be lovely, grandson.
Isn't it great? We're all one big family.
A little to the right there, Sonny.
Your shoulders sure are stiff, Grandpa.
You're getting a little rough there, Sonny.
Your bones.
Your bones! Your money! A simple Jamieson Price is the best voice actor ever would have sufficed. But I loved that from him and Richard's VA. And again, I'll keep saying it, but that as a last skit, right on the money in terms of Tales of Grace's F, beautifully marrying all of the touching and somber moments with levity and comedy. I know you said it at the beginning, Grail, but I really think it harmonizes those two aspects of its tonality in a way that I haven't seen in other Tales games. Merity, I was hoping we would find you. You saved Merity and Quickie, which is my best offhanded Merity impression that I can do. That or Utasume Yama Kamyo no no. I can't. It's been too long since I've played it for me to actually remember any Malniks, but you get the idea. You can't understand it. That's the point. And it sounds cute. That's also important. Yes, and I'm glad that you mentioned that, Grail. Glad I mentioned it. Because I didn't mention it when we were talking about things to keep an eye on as things wrap up, but let's not forget there are also multiple marriage plots on the line in this fourth act. So we'll have to see how those wrap up as well. I have also heard that before too. But even if it is a mistranslation, Grail, that's one of those that I'm happy with, because Merity to me sounds like the kind of thing that could be a name, and it's, I would say, fittingly unique of her character. Like, it sounds like something that would make sense as a human name, but also, have you ever met anyone named Merity? So something that kind of speaks to her heart and relatability and her foreignness all in one. Do it, I dare you. I'm telling you, it's a sweet name. No one else has it. And it's not one of those names that seems unique now, but then will be really common like 10 years down the line because everyone had that thought at the same time, which is so oftentimes the case with kids' names. Like, unless there's suddenly a huge rash of people who play Eternia. Well, that's it. We'll make Tales of Praxis really popular and get everyone to play Tales of Eternia with us. And then when you go to name your daughter Merity, everyone else also will, and you'll be screwed. That's the dream. Prolific fighter. All right. New title for Asbel. Ah. I gotta admit, I was hopeful it would be really easy to get him to level 80 down here. But he's only gone up 1 level. Alright, and up we go. I think you're evil for perpetually recommending that. I've even lost track. What are we on? I want to say moderate. Ah, normal. I scaled it down. That must have been left over from when Matt and Dan were here. And the problem is, now I'm so used to normal, I'm scared to crank it up to moderate for the last battle in the game, but maybe for some of the post-game stuff. Alright, we were going to rest and restock and dualize, obviously, but also we're going to go to Telos Astu to turn in those multiple dolls that we've gotten. So is there someone you recommend outfitting with Richard's title, Grail? The easiest one to replace with him during the main game, if the mood strikes us. That's all charged. Nothing new to dualize. I know, honestly, that just is a further testament to me of how they really treated the 4th act like a post-game dungeon in terms of difficulty spike, because I was confident we must be playing on at least moderate given how challenging these battles are, but it's also very much a Tales thing, as we all know, that in the optional end game content, which I guess the Act 4 falls under, they'll make you work for it. I don't have any problems with that. Okay. Oh, bummer. I wish we had a Wriggler crystal. That's alright. Asbel is good enough for me. All right. And items. Not the equipment shop, though. The item shop. Life bottles. I think that's adequate. All right. All the way back to Telos Astu. I believe it. I could definitely see great for really getting into the swing of things with dualizing. As we know, I've appreciated it a lot. It's been so fun to play around with, but I'll be the first to admit I still feel like even with the extent to which I use it, I'm still just scratching the surface. But in a way where I feel like I have still gotten a lot out of it, whereas in something like Tales of Phantasia, I felt like I was not getting anything out of the equipment system and also didn't want to learn enough about it to really get more out of it. I love Zisteria. I'm really looking forward to writing about it. I don't even know if I could write myself into liking their equipment system, though. I have limits. Oh, the Excel finalities get stronger every time? That's so cool. I didn't realize that. That is super cool. I was trying to figure out, you might just know this, Grail, but I couldn't tell from looking at the stats, because, for instance, Hubert has this Deathly Abyss weapon, and there are a few others like that. Like, I think we have a shot staff for Pascal, yeah, Ouroboros that says it's cursed. Do those actually have Devil's Arms mechanics, or are they just modeled in similar ways? Because it kind of seemed that way from the way their stats were laid out, but it at least doesn't say that that they have that capability. Yeah, I don't know either. Because I looked before and I saw it didn't have that ability, so I figured, okay, they're not. But then I was looking at the stats more closely today while I was grinding, and I was like, well, they do seem to have outsized power in a way that the other ones don't, so maybe? Yeah, I believe it. It would be weird at this point in the series development for them to simply not include them, which was part of why I was also interested in it. There you go, Pottery. Wins all around. Well, that makes more sense. I didn't realize the trade was like an ongoing event. I thought you meant that it had happened and people were just losing their minds talking about it on Twitter. Like I said, I don't know that much about sports or sports Twitter, but I could also see that as a possibility. But I'm glad it worked out for you and the team. You especially. All right. Richard. We're going to give the ability to Asbel at Grail's recommendation. Richard lookalike. And I think we also got a Sharia figure and a Malik figure. Cool. I'll give Malik to Sharia. And Sharia to Pascal. Many thanks. Yeah, that sounds like a typical Twitter timeline for any given event. And everyone has a great time and takes their blood pressure medicine, right? Well, at least you're in the good ending where you can sleep soundly afterwards. Oh, Grail. You know that A, that doesn't surprise me, and B, this is the last group on the planet that's going to judge you for that. If I had to round up all of the hours I've spent grinding for ridiculously specific things, it would not paint a pretty picture. That's all I'm going to say about that. It is nice, though, because I don't know if this is more a reflection on me or on modern game design standards. Although I've been playing a lot of games that aren't all that modern, but I can't remember the last time I really had to stop in a game and grind because I felt like my progress was blocked, which is always a pretty frustrating experience to me. Maybe an Elden Ring, and I'm just forgetting. That might be the most recent. The most vivid recent one in my mind was not that recent at all, but I remember, for all the love I have of the Xenoblade games, and we can reset that timer now, speaking of, and the first time I was playing the first Xenoblade Chronicles, there was a very specific point in the pretty early game where I just got, like, level checked by a boss, and I had to go run around the field a lot and level up before I could deal with him. And that was like, that's a cornerstone for me in terms of just a uniquely frustrating experience. sometimes there are certain games and contexts in which the grind can be kind of magical and meditative and cathartic and all those things. And again, Miyazaki's games are great for that, but it's not a fun feeling to feel like no matter what your ability level is, your character is just not powerful enough yet. We're going back. Yeah, and also I would say a day is reasonable. Like, I've certainly spent more than a day grinding things. Well, that just makes me pretty confident, Grail, that I am not going to beat the final boss the first time. Even playing on normal, once I normalize our skill levels, I feel pretty confident that I'm going to need multiple runs at it if you say that. All right, well, deep breaths, everybody. I think we're as equipped as we can be. Let's see what awaits us at the heart of the universe. Little Queen, please. Let us love you. Let us love you. All right. Face your chosen horizon and just walk on. Oh, there's the gate right there. All right. All right, friendos. Well, we set the context. We talked through a lot on the way to here. I don't think I have any final send-offs. It's been... we're 2 hours shy of exactly 100. I'm sure it'll be over 100 by the time we're through all the post-game stuff, but... Isn't it? There's a certain kind of magic, speaking of magical JRPG things, to having spent so long and so much substantive time on a journey through one game. Like, I really feel like, especially with Tales of Graces, we've gotten to know these characters quite well and intimately in a way that isn't always guaranteed in a story or a JRPG, maybe even in a Tales game. I know I've talked quite a bit about how much I love them for their character studies, but there is just a certain intimacy that we keep talking about in Tales of Graces, because I think that's part of its special secret sauce. And to crystallize all of that into a final decisive moment is no small feat, so let's see how they put a bow on it all, see how we feel about it. See you on the other side, exactly. Yeah, I was trying to do the math for that too, Grail. I don't... We'll have to go back and figure that out. It was certainly a great and long time in both of those games, although balanced quite differently, I would say. Oh, and they even tell us, once you pass this point, there's no turning back. Are you ready? I'm not, but I am. Let's do this, folks. That background looks like a lot of the background radiation from the Great Astral Spirit of Rena also. Be cool to do a side-by-side of those two final face-offs.
So this is Fodra's core.
It's so much bigger than Ephinia's.
Look, they're all here.
Child of Fodra, come to me. Take my hand and we will live in peace. Together. I will. All of us will become one with you.
But I am not you. I am Sophie Lant.
Sophie.
Asbel gave me the name. And I will treasure it forever.
You aid humans, child of Fodra? Very well then. The choice is made. Very well then. The choice is made. You humans commit crimes against life itself. Now pay with death. The planets work tirelessly to keep all of the life upon them in balance. It's their natural order of protection.
What's she doing? I can hear her. It's like she's speaking.
Inside my mind.
Humans are not content with harmony. Instead, you treat the world like a child's toy and abuse it as you see fit.
My head is splitting apart.
We're gonna be okay.
You have committed countless sins, and your lives are the coin by which sins are repaid.
Lambda.
Even I cannot hold her off for very long.
Don't worry. Just leave the rest to us, okay?
I'm sure that we can reach an understanding with Fodra. We'll show her the power of a dream. If we can trust Lambda, then we can convince Fodra to trust us.
Wow. More flower and Buddhist imagery.
Focus! No escape!
Uh,
Settle down!
damn you, game, giving me so many thoughts and then also forcing me to manage a battle instead of thinking them. Fodra Queen. What a name. Well, put a pin in a million and one things that we have to come back to. Ooh, that's a very interesting name, Grail. Glad you mentioned that.
Rip to pieces! Stampede strike!
She has quite a bit of HP.
I'll settle this. Fall before me! Lightning blade!
Grail, your comments, like Tales of Grace's F, really do take me all kinds of places. She reminds me a little of Kali, the Hindu goddess of destruction, right? It's been a while since my religious studies. But she has that kind of vibe of a goddess who cleanses and passes judgment and all of that. Man, it's hard to get close to her. I almost feel like we want like Malik or Pascal. See, Grail, right now when you have this energy is when we need someone to raid us. But alas, the cosmos is not that kind. Ah, yes, now I'm remembering what you were saying about blocking, and I do see why it's important.
Silver, shining blade of triumph. Come,
I think the idea is you just have to, in the immortal words of Dark Souls fans, get good. I can't wait to see your Mystic Art. That's something I'm really excited about. I'm not living in fear at all. I'm not worried about it! I'm not worried about it at all! I'll kill you. I had a great planet that I loved. Oh, those are some dodges. Oh, it's a spear made out of the flower that she rides on. That's cool. I haven't clocked that. It doesn't take much for Grail, but it does take one very specific thing. A lance. That's the key to defeating her. We need the support of Victoria. Spear Girl against Spear Girl. This girl hits hard. Yeah, I realized that as soon as I backstepped instead and got hit by it. Different range of motion. Honestly, I love the idea that it's cool, but I also love the idea that it's sufficiently rare we might not see it. Oh! I jinxed us. Wow! That also reminds me quite a lot of Tales of Eternia. And also, of course, of the aqueous layer surrounding Symphonia.
Sorry about that. Be gone! No escape! Be gone! No escape! Be gone!
Oh no, not another one. Don't tell me that. That was still a really cool one though, so if that's not even the cool one you were talking about, I'm all the more scared but also excited about that. Stop moving! God. Thank God for Sharia's Excel mode, because otherwise I don't even know if I'd be able to get to her. Oh, I wonder if she biases Sophie when she's attacking. That would be interesting. Frustrating, but interesting. It doesn't say? Oh, yes it does. Does it? 100. Good, good, good.
Sorry about that. No escape. No escape.
Ugh. Not the sidestep when I needed to backstep. The funniest moves.
Sorry about that. Let this strike get ready. Not looking good. Sorry about that. No escape. I failed everyone. Sorry about that.
I can still move.
I'm having a great time. I don't know what you're talking about. It's just exhausting how much she damages everyone. And status effects on top, because of course. Ugh! You can't even get close enough to run a mystic on her. We've been through worse. Could always be worse. The Spiral Draco comes to mind. Good, good. This is the age of Aquarius. Age of Aquarius. Get me while I'm using an item. Dirty pool. Planet. Sometimes you just have to take a breath to reset yourself. Really does feel this way. Although this is so much worse than fighting Secundus, the physical manifestation of all time, so it's a sliding scale, I think.
Everyone, sorry about that.
Shut up! Good! Kill everyone.
Sorry about that.
That's true. That would make it worse. God damn it. Keep forgetting about that attack second phase. Yeah, you're right. I just keep trying to get to the max to get the finality because it's so good. Yeah, you're right. Priorities. Good. At least it's like Big Bang and doesn't kill, although she's so powerful that really isn't that helpful. Good. I wish this game had treats. That would really help. You gotta have challenges. But yeah, this is stupid. Oh, great, she has stupid fire rockets. Oh, she's weak to assault arts now. That changed. Life bottle. Good.
Shining blade of triumph.
That was really cool, and I really hated it. Duel the Soul. Are there aren't any twin suns in this world that we know of, right? It's just fantastic planetary cosmic power. They're all really cool. Whatever. 3 mystics though. That's something. Oh no, what? It's a little queen now? That was really cool. What a throwaway moment in such a long battle, but really, really cool.
This cannot be.
I'm scared. If there's another one, I don't know if I don't know if I'm gonna be able to deal with it. So I did make it through with some items left. It's only because I decided to give up and start spamming them later than I usually would have. Man, if it were easier to get any damage on her, I would have had a better time. She really has that like a planetary force field around her, which again, very thematically satisfying, also going to make me lose my mind.
Lambda! Now!
Wow.
Lambda.
Here we go!
It's like a dark echo of Lloyd and his mom at the end of Tales of Symphonia.
Where are we?
Welcome. We are inside Phodra's consciousness.
Awesome.
Asbel?
No, I am Lambda.
Where is Asbel?
At ease, Protos Haste. No need to rush to conclusions. He is still alive. Unfortunately, even with my ability, I was unable to absorb all of Phodra. However, it did not end in failure. I was able to capture her heart, the part of her overrun by hate. The core should now return to normal, and in time regain its composure. Considering the way things ended, it may have been Phodra's own will to protect what precious life remains here. For now, I think it's best if I try to speak with her.
Who?
With the heart of Phodra, her animosity continues to swirl within me. I hope to understand her hatred, to melt it away, and eventually change it into trust. Who knows how long it may take? This could last a century or two, but we have the luxury of time.
That's so long. Does that mean that you will be alone all that time?
I no longer consider myself alone in this world. Not with a friend who can live forever.
Oh man.
Me?
Watch over me as time goes by, Protos Haste. Please, watch over my progress. I will start dreaming together with Fodra. In that dream, I hope that eventually we may form a kind of common understanding. Just as this man did for me. When we finally wake up, I think I would like to accompany her on a long journey and see the world. Now the time has come. I shall return Asbel to you.
Just the coolest character development conceivable.
Asbel!
He's just
Sophie.
like the tiredest he's been in his entire life.
Lambda. He said he was going to dream with Fodra.
Yeah. That's what I heard.
Asbel, are you okay?
Yeah. I think so.
Why are you crying?
From this point on, I must fight alone, all by myself,
Oh wow.
against the humans that would destroy us.
You don't have to fight anymore. Everyone here understands just how you feel. Please believe me, your dream will live on. It will be treasured and passed down among their children. Come with me and we can watch over them, you and I together.
Together. I think I'm out of time now. Will you take what's left of me with you? Please. Take my feelings and my hopes for this world. Let it know how I felt.
Little Queen.
Sophie. You're crying.
The little queen gave me all of her tears. When Fodra is green once again, let's come back to see it. Together. Again. everyone. Let's go home. To Aphinia.
Oh man, this is amazing.
Pascal, are you sure you want to be dropped off here?
Heck yeah! I want some time to take a look around the city.
You're going to investigate and see how the new Valkanist system is working. Is that correct?
Uh-huh, you got it. It would be totally irresponsible not to follow up. I know we take it for granted, but Pascal is really amazing. That's right, and don't you forget it. Keep those compliments coming. Aren't you forgetting something, little sister? Huh?
Taking a bath.
Maria, you came to see me. See you? Yeah, right. I could smell you from a mile away. How many days has it been since your last bath?
Oh man.
I kind of forgot.
I was kind of just riffing, but here we are.
Oh, I give up.
That is like her one character trait in the fourth act.
After you anymore. Anyone want to take a stray cat off my hands? Hey, let me go!
Sorry, but I am more of a dog person, actually.
Meow. Better scrub her down, just like you would a stray cat.
And in a Marcian culture, that means now they're married.
Meow. Go easy on me, okay? Meow.
You don't need my help to take a bath.
Jeez, little bro, you're scarier than Fourier.
Stop calling me that. My name is Hubert. Can't you remember that?
Okay. Hey, I know, I'll call you Hugh.
Hugh?
Okay, guys, I gotta run. See you later, Hugh.
This is goodbye from me, too.
Thank you for everything, Captain Malik. You too, Pascal.
Goodbye, everyone.
Until then,
I got a lot of love for Pascal.
Bye, guys. See you around.
It takes a lot of energy to tame a stray cat,
My man.
so hang in there. See you around.
Oh, so Hubert really has 3 dads. Or an older brother, I guess. Depends on the moment with Malik.
Don't forget to swing by Lant. Mom would love to see you. Don't worry. Besides, I'm sure I'll be back for your wedding. What? Don't tell me that. You still haven't talked to the poor girl. Like you're one to talk. At least I tried to talk to her. She just didn't really get what I said. Then it's no different.
those two are so much alike, in the strangest of ways.
That could be
How
the
are they
tagline
alive?
for this game.
Don't worry. You'll understand someday. Sharia,
Yes?
your relief work has been invaluable to us. However, I wouldn't want you to lose sight of your own happiness. It would be most tragic if an angel of joy, such as yourself, decided to abandon her own contentment. And besides, your happiness is Sophie and Asbel's happiness as well.
Thank you, Richard.
I just wouldn't feel right if I moved on and left you behind.
I don't know. You kind of sound like a sore loser.
Tell her how you feel. If you don't want to end up being a total loser. Well, all right then. I think that's my cue to leave.
Bye-bye, Hubert.
Thank goodness you're safe, my lord.
I apologize for making you worry. This latest excursion reminded me all the more of how precious peace is.
Yeah, he comes up every 30
I want
hours
to
or so,
build
Grail.
a future for Windor, for Symphonia, and for Fodra. There is more than enough prosperity to go around now. But I still have much to learn before I make that dream a reality. When peace is restored, I'd like to see more of the world. Asbel, Sophie, when that time comes, will you accompany me on that journey?
Of course.
Sure. You know it. Whenever you're ready, we can all meet once again at Lawn Hill.
Okay. All right, I must be off. Thank you for everything.
Well, I suppose I should get back to my relief work.
Oh. Yeah, right.
Okay, bye-bye.
Good luck out there.
Oh, for real? I was just joking.
Well, bye. Asbel, what about your promise?
Sharia.
The slowest walk away ever.
I know I'm always really bad with words, but please, if it's okay with you, I want you to come live with me.
Oh.
I know you have a lot of things to do, so I won't ask you to come back immediately. I'll be the one, waiting for you to come back home this time. Sophie and I will wait, for as long as it takes, all right?
Asbel. a child that looked a lot like both of you. And after a while, I finally figured out who he was. He was you and Asbel's great-great-grandson. Tell me, Sophie, would you be happy if that dream came true? Will it come true? Well, it just might. I would be so happy if that really came true. That's good. Sophie, Asbel, when I come home, I'm gonna make you all of your favorite foods.
Yeah, that might be the best explanation
If you promise to heat everything up.
of an after credit scene ever, by the way. Oh, I still wasn't ready for it to end. I'm so happy at a moment like this that these games have so much post-game content, because truly I just it's like what you were saying, Grail. I really, in a beautiful way, don't feel ready to say goodbye to these characters yet. I was sitting here thinking, and this is not to say that it's necessarily my favorite, because you guys know I have a fraught relationship with the idea of answering the question which Tales game is my favorite. New days to come. I love that, Grail. Thank you. But I was sitting here thinking, I think this might be a perfect game front to back. I'm so taken with everything we've talked about the ways in which they draw us into these characters and really get us to know them so well and respect them and see them in so many different ways across such a long arc of development in their journey. And like we talked about before, even now that we have the context of Little Queen and the core of Phaudra, this game is very deeply not concerned with the nature of the world or history in the way that you would get in another JRPG and in many Tales games. It feels, in that sense, remarkably ambitious to me to say, we're going to scaffold these relationships with the world, but we're going to take you on a 100-hour epic adventure that feels just as epic as any other JRPG, but is just concerned with the relationship and bonds between characters. And I really feel like they achieved that. Yeah, well, you know, it's the end credits. I'm allowed to be selective, Pottery. But that would be a good smash cut. I have complicated relationships with the things that make me suffer in games. Cut to Aaron being a Miyazaki fan and screaming at the TV. Exactly. Don't make me write a 10,000 word article about that. We should probably bump it to 15 now after that Chester one. There were so many things about that ending. We're going to have to just keep talking and thinking about that as we work through the post game. But I'll tell you the thing that probably visibly devastated me, because it was one of those moments in a story that feels so obvious after it's happened, but you never see coming, because you go through this whole fourth act and you get to know the idea of a little queen and you fight her so many times, and it's almost comical what a hive mind she is, the way that just more and more little queens keep spawning and spewing into battle when you're fighting her. But oh my god, then the idea that the hive is gone and there's just one left, and it's this broken, sad creature that has spent its entire life as part of this collective, this hive mind beyond itself, and now it has to cope with being totally alone in solitude like Lambda. Oh my god. Like, that was a tearjerker in the best of ways. Let's watch this and we can keep talking. Oh, they're renewing the pact like they promised. Another thing we saw at the end of Act 3. The purity of that smile. And remember now, that's Sophie and the Little Queen, not even just Sophie anymore. Which gives it a whole other layer of meaning, which we can also talk about, because that was something else that I loved.
I promise I'll watch over this world forever.
A vow to give her eternal life meaning and continuity with her friends. Oh, thank goodness it does keep going. It knew we weren't ready to say goodbye.
Once there was a young boy who discovered a lost seed. He planted it in his yard, and he took care of it every day. Over time, the lost seed grew up and blossomed into a beautiful flower. What do you think happened to the seed after that? It turned into a bright, shining star that watched over everyone.
She's talking about herself.
This was its way of thanking the boy who had been so very kind to it. Which star was it? Well, it's the one we all know best. Our favorite star of all.
Oh, man. That's a great scene to end on, too, because this isn't what I was thinking of talking about, but something that came to my mind as I was working on this piece about Chester and the Xillia games is I think there's a really interesting and beautiful point of contrast also between Yggdrasil, the tree, the new world tree that Lloyd and everyone birth at the end of Tales of Symphonia, and the tree atop Lant Hill. Because if you think about it, they're clearly both centerpieces to the story and the party's resolve and the way in which they want to support the world and everything like that. But they're kind of mirror images of each other in the sense that Yggdrasil, Martel, the summoned spirit, tells us is the hopes and wishes and resolve of an entire world, in the same way that Martel herself is a bunch of different entities coming together, whereas the tree atop Lant Hill is so deeply personal and really becomes a representation of this intimate shared relationship between just four people at the end of the day. And I think that speaks a lot to the different approaches of those two games in terms of what it is to bring peace and prosperity to the world and to each other, because like we've been talking about, Graces is so intimate in relationships first, and focuses on those personal relationships, whereas like we were talking about at the top of the stream, Symphonia seems much more concerned with bringing peoples together and harmonizing an entire world. So interesting to have those pictures of the two trees side by side. I know. Well, I was thinking about that too, Grail, because I was laughing to myself at the end at this idea that, like you said, I guess a lot of people don't like Little Queen because, especially in that moment of just her isolation and sadness, I mean, that was one of the most humanizing moments I've maybe ever had with a villain who was one of the most deeply inhuman and alien when we were first introduced to her. And I think that transition in the way in which we saw her character and how effortlessly it happened without us even realizing it speaks to just the overall deftness of this fourth act and the story in general. But yeah, so many of these villains, like I talked about in that article, I think participate in the source code of Daus, where whether or not they're someone who can be forgiven or redeemed, like we come to deeply understand them in oftentimes a heartbreaking way, but sometimes in a way that does totally redeem them, like Lambda. How cool was it that not only was he able to be the hero of the fourth act of the game in which he was the main villain, but also, speaking of lineage and legacies and passing on dreams, he was able to save the world by doing the exact thing for Fodra that Asbel was able to do for him. Say, look, I owe this kid. I want to pay forward everything that he's done for me, so I'm going to go into the mind space for as long as it takes, and I'm going to talk and heal Fodra in the way that Asbel did for me, and then we're going to travel the worlds, and I'm going to show her the worlds in the way that Asbel showed me. What a cool lineage. The other thing that I thought was just so special, and again, in hindsight, it ties together so well, but I didn't see it coming, was this idea of coming to understand, not even understand, growing into a new version of yourself by harmonizing with others and forming new communities. So we go from this picture of people who are isolated and wall themselves off, and feel as if no one can relate to them, and so just shun the world in the beginning of the game with Lambda and Richard, which is then solved and overcome by someone like Asbel saying, look, let me be your guide, let me show you the world, let me help you come to trust people in a way that I know you're not capable of on your own, and you can see through my eyes. But they're still crucially separate entities, right? Lambda is hitching a ride along with Asbel and is getting a different experience of the world. But like I talked about at the end of Act 3, there's a sense in which Asbel is just Lambda's avatar, like Lambda's hanging out, watching things passively, coming to cultivate himself, but they're still distinct. And then along comes the fourth act, and there's this whole different concern where even if it seems like humanity is still the problem at the end of the day, it's this issue, I think almost a deeper issue of collectivism versus individuality, in the way that we were talking about over the last stream as we were working through the depths and seeing the Little Queen, and in the way that we were talking about when we started this stream, where I feel like almost a way to pose the challenge of the Little Queen is the world is something that is beautiful exactly because it is a collective that's shared in and equally distributed between everyone who just participates in that balance and doesn't really have a perspective of their own, in the way that Little Queen doesn't seem to, and in the way she speaks of harmony, right, in that final confrontation. And yet humans are these things that are deeply individualistic and concerned with figuring out who they are and relating to one another. And as soon as there's that separateness, that sense of self that seems so threatening to Fodra that it's an open question whether Asbel will even be able to find himself again after participating in her, there also becomes the potential for negative emotions and dissonance between people and all of these things where I am not the same as you, and therefore conflict comes about. And it's an important point to note that in so many of these games that we've been talking about in the Tales series, from what I was talking about in Phantasia to my study of Vesperia and Tales of Destiny, well, the series offers all of these really complex portraits of the right and wrong ways in which to relate to and support other people. It is really either individuals talking with each other or networks of individuals who still retain at the end of the day their individuality and finite sense of self. And I feel like that ending was such a beautiful challenge to that, where it seemed to me to be saying, you know, if you have this concern over the individual seizing the world or disrupting community, and this threat of death that comes from the idea that you are an individual who will die rather than part of a community that will persist, then the right solution isn't to throw out the idea of the individual. Rather, it's to recognize that the way in which we conceive of ourselves can grow and evolve by fusing with other people over time in very literal ways or in very metaphorical ways. So that beautiful sense in which Sophie recognizes this part of the Little Queen collective who had been isolated and lost when the rest of her herd was partially culled, partially taken in by Lambda, partially reabsorbed into the core, and says, look, let me carry on the hopes and dreams and those things that live within you. And she combines in a way that party members have, where I was thinking again about titles, since, like we said, titles are such a big part of this game. I don't think it's an accident that a lot of those titles are very explicitly ways for the various party members to share and participate in each other's identities and abilities, where you get someone like Richard who spends time with characters in battles and is able to inherit things from them, even to the point where using those dolls that we were, metagaming on Fodra, characters can come to very directly embody other characters. And I think it's such a touching way of showing how, like Sophie and Asbel were discussing in their resolution scene on Fodra, and like Sophie said to the Little Queen at the end, when you recognize someone's dream and decide to dream with them, right, you can do something that is, in a certain sense, more essential than just looking through their eyes like Lambda did with Asbel. You can actually harmonize your being with them and become part of the same lineage of growth and carrying that dream on across the world in a way that does do justice to the world and the broader community, because you're not just seeing someone as one aspect of your background in the way that, say, the Malik of the base game was with his history in Fendel. You're seeing someone as a particular aspect of yourself and something that you want to empower. So, continuing on with Asbel's dream and taking care of his descendants surely isn't going to be the only thing that Sophie does. That's not going to be the one thing that defines her, but electing to take up that dream creates this kind of harmonic bond between Sophie and Asbel that I think is just deeper than two individuals in relationship with one another. It's creating this kind of intention that metaphysically binds them as one kind of agent, where even though there are two people there, they're both electing to work towards the same thing. And you can see how that changed and empowers someone's perspective even in those last few scenes with Sophie, where, as I was marking, from the time in the story where she absorbs Little Queen onwards, you have to remember that both aspects of those exist within Sophie. And when I was thinking about that was part of what made me, quite honestly, tear up when she was talking with Sharia about this dream that she had. And Sharia asked, would it make you happy if that thing turned into a reality? And Sophie was just so overwhelmed with a joy and the kind of happy tears that she had after she took Little Queen in, saying that would make me just so unspeakably happy. And I really, I heard that as much from Little Queen as from Sophie, because I feel like that's the exact recognition that Little Queen desperately wanted to see but was unable to, and therefore had shut herself off from the idea that humans, with all of their individuality and intention, can actually leverage those abilities to create these strong bonds that unite and bind them with one another, so that they're no longer just an individual. They're part of something greater, but part of something greater in a way that defines their identity and gives them a firm sense of who they are. And what better way to represent that than in a lineage, right? A chain of children descending down through the generations who all have their own sense of self, all their own aspirations, all their own titles, but also surely share in the intentions of their father and grandfather and great-grandfather, in the same way that Aspel ultimately came to terms with inheriting the intentions of Aston and all of those great side quests that we did, thinking about him weighing the role of the Lord of Lant and what it was that he was going to do to tend to the flowers around him in the same way that Aston, his father, did before. I'm so blown away by that. It was cool too because my immediate thought when I saw the Soul of Phaudra, Keeper of Phaudra, I forget the name of all of the fused little queens, which, by the way, like, what a great foil and counter image to the kind of fusion and harmony between peoples that I was just talking about in a positive light. This kind of monstrous, wrathful deity that comes about from all of the little queens fusing into this one thing. I don't know if this was something that you also felt, but I immediately got twinges of Origin in Tales of Symphonia. I guess Ratatosk also, but just the idea of a god who was responsible for everything and yet had been betrayed by humanity and so decided to just turn its back on humankind altogether. Funny, because we were comparing the idea of Phaudra all the way along to the great astral spirit of Rena, but it definitely had that sense of just having given up on something that it once made a possibility for, because you have to imagine that happened, right? Humans surely are part of the natural ecosystem, and you can't imagine that a planet would doubt that. But along the way, as humans did what humans do, I imagine that Phaudra became jaded and gave that up. But I think it's a testament to the philosophy of this game in comparison with something like Tales of Symphonia. Not that one is better than the other, that calling Origin back to his faith in humans terminates or culminates rather in the party getting this weapon, the Eternal Sword, this thing that allows them to exert their will and their desire to terraform the earth, to reshape it in a specific way without, by the way, getting the consent of anyone across the world. Whereas at the end of Tales of Graces, it's much more like it stands almost in a more mystic recognition of the whole, where bringing Phaudra back into the fold of trust and belief in humans is not an excuse to reshape the world, but rather an acknowledgement that we can all harmonize with the world exactly by harmonizing with each other and developing into these communities and lineages that were different than what has come before. So honestly, as much as I wasn't expecting it to connect in this way, really glad that I just worked through that study on the Xillia games, because you can see how this, speaking of lineages, like Tales of Graces certainly stands as a descendant to that in a way that I think is thoughtfully approaching some similar issues from a very different lens and giving us a different way to think about those things. Well, and that's one of those things that's an interesting question to me, Grail, the idea of what was the outcome of Little Queen, because I at least didn't feel like it was perfectly clear to me what the relationship between Little Queen and Phaudra was, because we definitely get that description of Little Queen as this immune system for the planet. But then at the end, it definitely seemed like everything that Little Queen was channeled into what seemed like a representation of the planet's intention itself. And so I almost wonder whether part of the problem, because we also saw Lambda speaking more metaphorically at the end, saying, oh, I absorbed and am going to work with the part of Phaudra that had been taken over by hate. And so I almost wonder whether, like, the explanation of Little Queen is not so much that she's like something separate from the soul of Phaudra, but rather like she's almost an autoimmune disease, like the body and soul of Phaudra, like starting to attack itself just because it's like gone haywire and gotten this resentful misunderstanding of humans. So I don't know that I see it as like a bunch of attackers being dead. I almost feel like what the party achieved through that battle was kind of surgically removing the part of the soul of Fodra that had been manifesting as Little Queen and giving it to Lambda to heal over time, and the rest of the spirit of the planet stayed with the planet, with the exception, of course, of that one Little Queen who was left as as collateral damage, basically, until Sophie saw her and recognized herself in her and took her in, right? Really important for Sophie too, I think, because I think a corollary of that idea of being able to carry on someone's dream and kind of metaphysically share your existence with them is that you need to be able to pretty directly share their perspective, maybe in a way that is deeper than what's possible with Asbel and Lambda, just because they're such different beings. Whereas Sophie recognized, oh, you're someone who is the same kind of thing that I am, that will live forever, are so broken by emotions that you're just feeling for the first time, sent out into the world away from your community like I was. But I know how to heal you, and I know how to actually support both of us by combining our spirits into something different. So such a special gift to Sophie in the end, I would say, that she was able to get that kind of harmony with a friend who had her same kind of existence, to help give her the strength and fortitude necessary to carry on the dreams of friends with shorter lifespans in that particular position that she was in. Yeah, exactly. That sounds like it could have been written exactly for Fodra, Grail. So I think you're right on the money. Yes, that was an interesting thing too. I clocked that also. There was definitely that line where it seemed like Fodra almost took herself to be speaking for all of the planets, which also, as you say, implies like a broader solar system or series of planets. Another interesting tie-in to Tales of Eternia, by the way. And that's interesting too, because for all the reasons that I've been talking about, I think that the antagonism of Fodra does come out to be a very different thing than the antagonism of Lambda in the base game. But isn't it interesting to also imagine that maybe Fodra is similar to Lambda in the sense that if all the planets have these spirits, potentially they all have these senses of consciousness and personality also, but they're not all teaming up to eliminate humanity or something like that. Fodra seems like the odd one out in being taken over and possessed by her resentment of humankind, and so perhaps has similarly isolated herself from her herd. Ironically, since she's all about the hive mind, right? But in that broader cosmic sense, isolated and needs to be healed and redeemed and connected with her own sense of community in the same way that Lambda was by Asbel, and now that Lambda is making possible for Fodra. And there we have another lineage, right? A lineage of healing, of one isolated and abused individual helping the next one in line to learn to trust again, right? Rather than seeing them as something that needs to be stopped, passing on kindness and understanding and gratitude, rather than just killing the thing. Something that also smacks of the kind of spiritual enlightenment that comes from any good Tales climax. Oh boy! And I will say, on a lighter note, I wasn't expecting, especially in the wake of Tales of Arise, that I would be satisfied with the ways in which the two marriage plots wrapped up. But I totally was. I was happy with both of them. Hubert and Pascal, the way that they wrapped up seemed pitch perfect to them. And it's a kung fu thing, right? The idea of the drunken master kung fu type, where the kung fu master just bumbles around almost as if he's drunk and causes all this chaos, but in the midst of all the chaos, he's able to deftly overcome all his enemies because he actually knows exactly what he's doing. Like Po in Kung Fu Panda, that kind of kung fu master, right? And I almost got that sense, especially at the end in that last scene from Pascal, where I think it was you, Grail, the last time we saw Pascal and Hubert in the resolution scenes. It was like, oh, is she really this dense, or does she just know exactly what she's doing and she's playing along in a way that makes sense for her and the party at that moment in time? And we even get that from the text. Like there's one skit that we saw, I think in the final dungeon, where the party was saying, man, sometimes I think Pascal just puts on this front to help us all get along better and deal with the things that we need to, which seemed very well supported and a nice way of casting light on the way in which I think her character, just as much as anyone's in this game, is deeper than we might suppose. And so that sense in which like she always knew what Hubert wanted and what he was up to, but they kind of had to reach the right moment and the right context to really be able to begin their relationship together. Like that felt very apt for her, and also for Hubert kind of finding a way to get over himself and all his hangups and actually be honest with her for once. And that nice little touch of them deciding, okay, Pascal can call him Hugh, which is a nice representation of Pascal's quirkiness, and also recognition that Hubert doesn't want a sibling relationship with her, and that's not what's going to happen. I loved that. And then the idea that really the first act in that new world in the next chapter of Sophie helping Asbel bring his dream out into the world was actually basically pushing Asbel into a situation of confessing his feelings for Sharia. I loved that. I loved that it brought it all the way back to the end credit scene of the third act. I loved too, and it to me spoke to the game's maturity, that we were able to see that scene all the way through. Because I'll tell you, I was sitting here nervous because a lesser game would have had that whole scene in Windor's capital up to the moment on the stairs where Asbel is just looking at Sharia and getting ready to talk to her, and then it would have cut to credits and just leave us to imagine what might have happened, but not taking a firm stand on it. And I think it's such a great testament to the Tales games and their thoughtfulness in terms of character development, and also like allowing relationships to be consummated in these games and fully be actualized, that they give us that entire scene and that moment at the end of this 100-hour epic that we've been through with them. I think that was really special. That's true. Yep. Good to keep in mind that Pascal is older, Grail. Yep. Yeah, we forget that because she's so playful, but I think there's definitely a method to her madness. Yep. Yeah, hard to parse, but that's why we come here and do what we do. Oh, I mean, I think that's a jokingly low bar, Grail. Of course, I think the game story is good. I think it's hard to say more by way of verdict than I really feel like this is a perfect game. I'll tell you, so I'll say a couple things. First, it's a game that unlike some of the other games we've talked about, I definitely loved it the first time I played it, although I certainly didn't appreciate its place in the series as much as I do now. But I knew I was going to get a lot out of it when I came back to it. I'm so happy that we did the fourth act, because as we've been talking about, that added so much amazing context to it. And I'll have to play Beyond the Dawn again, so I kind of hesitate to say this, but I would say right now, first impulse, I feel like what Lineage and Legacies added to Tales of Graces was better connected and more thoughtful than Beyond the Dawn. And I loved Beyond the Dawn, but I think there's a really strong sense I have that Act 4 feels like just the act that was always meant to be there and a single continuous part of the story, whereas Beyond the Dawn feels like its own kind of side story or coda to Tales of Arise, similar kind of to what Alicia's story is to Tales of Zestiria. So I loved it. I thought it was a perfect game. Like I said, I don't know if I can do rankings, but I'll say, I think to your point, Grail, the fourth act especially was great for just plumbing character development even deeper. And I do feel like I feel a special attachment to these characters that's different than the kind I feel to the other characters in the Tales games, because I love all of the characters in the series. I think they all offer something really interesting, even like Chester, if they're not in the story all that much. But there is a way in which I don't often get emotionally attached to characters personally. I know that's something that happens for a lot of people. I see them much more often, first and foremost, as just aspects of the text that are meant to express certain parts of the themes and message and form the backbone of the story in the way that I talked about, like the function of Chester in Tales of Phantasia. But in this game, I think just the questions its story was concerned with made it so much easier for me without even realizing it to get deeply invested in those characters. Like, I was very serious when I said at the end of this, man, I'm so glad that we have a post game because I don't want to say goodbye to these characters yet. And I never feel that way about games or stories. I will oftentimes have a deep appreciation for the characters, but once they've reached the end of their arcs, I feel like, okay, you've served your purpose in the story. I'm so happy that I was able to see you express that arc and that purpose. And now I'm happy to put that down and go on to a different story. I feel something deeply different here that I think is really important. And I think the other thing that I'll say in terms of a lasting legacy of this that I'll be thinking of going forward, just to reiterate something that we have been talking about over the last few streams, is I really think there's something special about the way it designs its conflict that guides you through the world. It sounds simple, but it can't be overstated, the impact of what it is to go through a full-length epic JRPG that's motivated by nothing besides the sadness or distrust of other characters, especially in a game where there are 3 different nations that don't always get along, but that is so clearly not the backbone of the story's plot and what is driving you and keeping you going, which makes me think that it has to be almost a subversively designed conflict intentionally on the part of the developers, because it almost feels to me this time around like the 3 nations is a bit of a red herring in terms of what it is that's going to drive the story, especially where if you look on the back of the box, I don't have the box with me on the desk, but I mentioned this when we went into the game, the packaging itself very clearly foregrounds like, oh, journey through this world with 3 warring nations and characters figuring out their place in those nations over time. And that has nothing to do with what is at the core of the story, I would say. That's how I feel right now. And I think that's really interesting. So I'll tell you, the nature of that conflict as so motivating and intimate and personal is really going to stick with me, and I think motivate me to critically evaluate a lot of conflicts in the other Tales games and in other stories as we go forward, saying like, yeah, okay, it feels epic. There are a lot of different warring sides, but do I feel really emotionally attached in the way that I did in Graces? And if I don't, is it really worth it? Or is there maybe a simpler and more direct and more human way of expressing these things? And how special too that, as I said with Phodra and the Little Queen, in a game that oftentimes feels so foreign and alien, it always keeps its anchor with those emotional ties and connections, even to the point where you feel deep sympathy and pain for an entire planet. I know I didn't feel that for the Great Spirit of Astral Rena. I felt like I had a philosophical appreciation of it, and sympathy for its intentions, but not that kind of wanting to reach out and give it a hug in the way that Sophie did the Little Queen. Absolutely, Grail. Yeah, we've talked about pacing a lot before, and I think that's a great thing to bring up. The childhood arc feels like ages ago. No matter which way you want to cut it, it was ages ago. But I think it's part of the special quirkiness, to go back to what we were talking about earlier, of Tales of Graces, that it has both that introductory sequence with everyone as kids and also this future arc of them not only dealing with their nature as individuals after their arcs are done, but also of looking to the future even beyond the end of the game, which I think is also part of what makes the conclusion hit in the way that it does, because through that whole arc of seeing them grow up, and also the arc in Act 4 of seeing them wrestle with what they want for the future, you really feel that there's a life to these characters that they're going to have after the story is over, and how special that they're going to be living it out, how sad that they won't have reason to look to the player for help anymore, so we won't get to peer into it and see all that great banter between them, you know? Oh, is that your sense? Do you think people are disappointed with this game because it's different than JRPGs with giant problem and the characters working to stop it? Yeah, I'll say, what was the game I was talking about that was like this? Oh, Tales of Vesperia. I'll be the one to reset the timer this time. You might remember one of the things that got me so down the rabbit hole with Tales of Vesperia and Tales of Praxis was that I really, really didn't like it the first time I played it. And the reason was similar to what you just said about Tales of Graces, Grail. I think I had totally misaligned expectations based on the exact aspects of the typical JRPG that Tales of Vesperia was trying to subvert, where I was thinking, okay, you know, diverse multicultural group of people teams up, they all have a common purpose, they become this invincible party unit that's battling against some giant big bad, right? And Tales of Vesperia is deeply not that. It is self-consciously not that. It's concerned with a bunch of individual characters weaving in and out of each other's lives and figuring out how to support each other's individuality in a way that cascades out to the rest of the world. So I think it's telling, and maybe even a broader comment on the Tales series, that we would see that same thread come up in the reception of Tales of Graces, where if it's the case that the community, broadly speaking, isn't a fan of it, and I don't know, Grail, but it sounds like you do, because they were expecting something that was more typical of a JRPG, isn't that interesting, when I think part of what makes this game stand on its own as something that is unique and powerful is exactly because it sets you up to expect something that is very typical of a JRPG and a story, and forces you to discover, along with the characters, that those are not the kinds of conflicts that move the world and shape history. It's all just the connections and interactions between individuals that form communities and that create collectives from the ground up in this special kind of way, right? Yes, the game story is its characters, which is interesting. Again, like we'll do some more unpacking in the post game of what makes Tales of Graces different as a standalone title from the rest of the games, because that's one of those interesting statements. This game's story is its characters, that I think is deeply true, but it's interesting to try to analyze, why does that feel importantly true in Tales of Graces in a way that's different than the other Tales games? Because characters, in a certain sense, are always at the heart of Tales games. We talk about this all the time, but I think there's a different sense in which they're at the heart of Tales of Graces F. And of course, we've been giving some reasons and ways in which to see why that's the case over this post-game discussion, but I imagine as we unpack it more, we'll definitely get more out of that. So let's keep coming back to that in the post-game. Yeah, it's definitely important that it is structured differently than Tales of Vesperia or Tales of the Abyss. Yeah. Yeah, and that's just amazing to me too, because like I understand, especially in a Tales game, that gameplay and story can be superficially very different, but I mean, I can't imagine investing in the gameplay and the characters of something that is as epic and cohesive as Tales of Graces without also falling in love with, or at least feeling compelled to try to better understand its story. They just feel, especially in a game like this, so intimately interrelated to me. And that's something that we've been talking about off and on throughout this entire study, but I definitely want us to come back to it in the post game too, as we go through all that fun work of unlocking further things for the characters and beefing them up and everything that you've been talking about, Grail. I also want us to say, to ask the question and answer, okay, given that we have all of these things on our mind from the story and these things it's trying to express to us, how can we tie more connections between those conclusions and the overall arc now that we know where the characters start, how they go, and where they end up at the end? How can we tie all that to the various gameplay mechanics and these other systems that we've been talking about throughout the stream? Things like titles, assault arts versus burst arts, the Excel gauge, and that amazing new mechanic that was purely designed to support the development the characters further go through in this fourth act beyond the conclusion of a journey that they already had. Because I have no doubt we'll get a lot of cool insights out of that as well. Well, Grail, first of all, I'm going to express my gratitude to you for saying that, because it's likewise a pleasure, and I get just as much out of working through it and talking with you and Pottery and everyone else on the stream about it and analyzing it in real time. That's so much of the value that I get out of this and why I think it's really worth doing. But yeah, I think another side to the fact that it is so concerned with an intimate emotional understanding of its characters is that I think there's a deep and real sense in which, especially playing it for the first time, its story is something that you feel with your emotions rather than something that you process with your intellect, which is maybe a funny thing to say since we've been intellectualizing it to death over the whole course of this playthrough, but we have the benefit of having played it before and having the context of all these other Tales games and all of these handholds to get us traction as we're trying to put together an analytical understanding of it. But I think especially on first playthrough, and especially given that it's not a game that's related to any of the other fictional worlds or entries in the Tales series, it does just stand alone as this special feeling that you have over the course of the many hours that you spend with these characters. Because I had that same experience my first time with the game. Like, it felt special. I remembered the emotional beats of it more than things that actually happened in the plot. And coming back to that and trying to understand, okay, why is that really the case, has been so special and deeply rewarding to me too. So the feeling is totally mutual. Absolutely. All right. Well, friends, I'm going to give a call for final thoughts right now, just final thoughts for the evening. Certainly not final thoughts for Tales of Grace's F, but Grail, if you have any other thoughts, or Pottery, if you're still lurking, or anyone else who's still lurking. So I'm going to wrap things up for the evening, but yeah, I'll reiterate. I'm earned a trophy. I'm so excited to continue working through the post game and exploring this world with you. It's just as much, if not more, than the other Tales games that we've had on the stream. Something that I think will sit with us and be something to continue processing for a while. So all the better to have time continuing to work through its world as we try to put these pieces together. Good game all around. Amen, Pottery. Couldn't have said it better or more succinctly myself. Okay, I will watch this real quick. Okay, that's Duel the Soul. You linked me to Duel the Soul. I imagine her next one is going to be... Oh, no, Aquarius Sphere. Since this isn't on the stream, Grail was linking me to the art that we didn't get from Fodra. Oh my god. Well, yeah, I can definitely see why that was even more epic than the other two. It reminds me actually of one of the iconic, like, super cosmic planetary attacks of Sephiroth at the very end of the original Final Fantasy VII. Yeah, I'm glad that you showed me that, and I'm sad I didn't see it, because especially with the use of Nova Explosion or whatever it was called in the middle, it already has my gears turning, thinking, okay, how can we better triangulate the relationship between this Nova concept that we were talking about earlier in the stream with Fodra and Elith. So if I don't sleep tonight, it's because I'm pulling my hair out over that. All thanks to you. That was a good one. Yes, for everyone watching the stream, if you hadn't seen the missing mystic art from that final boss fight, go look it up. It is definitely worth it. Oh, you have to trigger it. Yes, okay. That makes sense. Another great tie-in with Eternia, exactly as you say. I'm continuing to scheme to figure out how to get us all to play Eternia ASAP, so stay tuned for that too. I'm so happy to have worked all the way through the amazing main story of another of these games with you, my friends. And yeah, I don't think I know of a better touchstone for signing off except to say, as I always do, these games, and the reason that the series is called Tales of Praxis is that these games are so concerned with how we make sense of ourselves in a world with relationships, and figure out how to act in a way that does honor to ourselves by honoring those relationships and the broader world. And if my study of Chester that I just published was a meditation on how to act in the first place, and my meditations on Vesperia and Destiny were reflections on what it is to interact in networks of individuals in a way that empowers everyone, and my meditation on Tales of the Abyss was a way of thinking about how to rectify the cosmos through the action of an individual, then I think it's a great further unique flavor to that to add Tales of Graces, showing us how to define our individual selves by making that individual self dependent on things beyond our own identity. It sounds paradoxical in that beautifully mystical and esoteric way that Tales games often are, but ask yourself as we move onwards, as you think about who you really are, and you notice maybe character traits that you inherited from people in your family, or things that you love because they call to mind a specific memory of a time that you had with someone else, how much of you really is just you in a vacuum acting on the world and relating to other individuals, and how much is actually maybe this fusion or amalgam or communal identity that you've put together for yourself by sharing in the identities of other people. I think Tales of Graces wants us to ask that question, and I think it has a deeply optimistic take on the consequence of living your life that way. So that's your homework. I gave you a little homework. I guess my other homework is if you have not read the new article yet, I would love to talk about it with you. So please, if you're interested in looking further into these games, take a few minutes. It'll only take a few minutes, and read my meditation on Chester and Tales of Phantasia, Symphonia, Dawn of the New World, and then take a break from that, thinking about your own individual self and the other individuals who are in there with you, and think about the ways in which they are. Yeah, thank you, Grail. All right. Well, another big and final thank you to everyone who has been with us through this journey. I know many people have come in and out over these last 100 hours. So Grail and Pottery, I'll thank you both personally and quite deeply for being in it for the long haul, and especially for being present and hanging out and digging into this conclusion with me. I'll hope to see you again. If you're lurking, if you haven't been here in a while and you're thinking about coming back, if you're watching the VOD, know that you are always welcome in these live book clubs. These really are, in my mind, the perfect substance of game to dig into in exactly this kind of communal way for all of the reasons we've been talking about. So we're going to continue doing that with Tales of Graces. I'm told there is at least one EX dungeon hanging out waiting for us, if not more content beyond that. Speaking of things that will probably make Aaron want to pull his hair out, even as he insists this is a perfect game. The two aren't mutually exclusive, even though my behavior on the stream might make you think otherwise from time to time. But we'll be back 7 p.m. Eastern on Friday. It'll be a Friday night stream as we grind through to the end with a capital E of Tales of Graces F. Oh, dope. That is right. 99 hours exactly. Well, how about that in terms of timestamp to end on? Though I'm sure we'll be past 100 hours by the time all is said and done. But that is a really nice moment to mark the conclusion of the main plot. And don't forget, as we work through the final motions of Tales of Graces F and talk about my new publication and think about the next steps for the series, I'll make a point of starting February with a proper announcement of this. But you all know, and you're the ones who really follow along, Tales of Xillia 1 and 2 will be next on the stream. So get hyped for that. Get a game plan on the things you want to dig into, things you want to talk about. But don't let that overshadow Tales of Graces F. I know we still have a wealth of knowledge and insight to plumb from this before all is said and done. All right, my dear friends, I hope you have a great rest of your night. Thank you from the bottom of my heart and on behalf of With a Terrible Fate for coming on this latest journey with me. It really means a lot to me and has continued my moral and spiritual and literary education. So I hope it's done a little of the same for you. I'm Aaron Suduko, the founder of With a Terrible Fate. I've been your host, and I'll see you back here in just a few short days. Till then, game well, think well, be well. Cheers, my friends.